Even the brightest star shining in the night sky above the clouds can be hidden from people's eyes at the bottom of the deepest pit. But no matter where it is, a star will always be a star. If it keeps shining, that means the light's still burning in its heart. A real knight's sword, great grip, made from top-notch steel. He looked at it with longing, dreaming of the day he'd wield that weapon. A familiar voice from behind said he knew he'd find him here. He always comes here. It was a young woman named Zamina, Vlad's friend, who always looked out for him. The guy told her to leave him alone and not get on his nerves. The girl, hurt by his rudeness, reminded him that rumors were already spreading around town about Vlad's weird behavior. Getting closer, she asked if he still heard voices when he held the staff. Vlad didn't answer, and Zamina wondered what sins her friend had committed in a past life to deserve such a curse. Who would have thought a guy would get struck by lightning in broad daylight, and not just any lightning, but black lightning? Zamina warned him to keep a low profile, since the new bishop used to be an inquisitor, and if he found out about Vlad's situation, he'd be toast. The guy didn't get why she was telling him this, but she was just really worried about her buddy. She reminded him that a lot of people saw the black lightning incident, and rumors were flying around town. Vlad was sure no one would come after him just for admiring a pretty sword. His friend suggested buying the sword. It probably wasn't that expensive, just a regular forge in an alley. But Vlad replied that such a magnificent weapon cost a whole 5 gold coins. Zamina was surprised that a chunk of metal was so expensive. You could practically live off that for a year. Mentioning the metal scrap really set the blacksmith off. He charged at them, hammer raised, yelling for them to get lost. The blacksmith was sure his sword wasn't for the likes of these kids, but Zamina called the old man crazy, saying everyone in the slums was broke. Her comments just made the old blacksmith even angrier, and he was barely holding it together. The girl couldn't understand why he was making such a fuss over a sword that only a knight would use, and there weren't any knights in the slums. The old man roared with rage, calling Zamina a little brat and ordering her to go back to washing dishes. The girl got mad. She wasn't a kid anymore, but a young lady who deserved some respect. Vlad told the old man to calm down and added that they were leaving. The old blacksmith watched the young people go, muttering insults about Zamina under his breath. There was a time when he fed that girl and her friends, and now she talks to him like that. The blacksmith noticed clear footprints on the ground. Vlad had been standing there for a long time staring at the sword, long enough to leave an impression. The blacksmith figured the kid would be better off thinking about how to make rent. The man picked up the sword, thinking Vlad shouldn't be dreaming about weapons like this. A slum kid like him would never escape. He should sell this sword to someone who could actually use it. He couldn't let his last work rot in a dump like this. The old man could see plain as day that both the sword and Vlad shone just as brightly in this miserable place. Suara, the beacon of the northern economy, embodying the power of the Bayezid family. Figures that even in a shiny place like this, there'd be dark shadows, slums where the dirtiest stuff goes down. A small brothel where all sorts of people come looking to unwind, body and soul. One of the customers grabbed a working girl by the hair, yelling at her and calling her a cheat. The girl begged him to let her go, saying she didn't do anything wrong and couldn't have ripped him off. On the way, a fat dude ran into Vlad, who worked here making candles and selling the regular kind. The disgruntled guest demanded to see the madam, but the guy said that would cost gold coins, not silver. The client was furious, claiming the candles were a rip-off, burning out before he could even get started. Vlad scoffed, saying you can't get anything done with just one candle, and if he's broke, the guy should stick with his wife instead of coming here. That sassy remark just made the unhappy guest even angrier. Vlad calmly added that this customer was making way too much noise. Pointing at a huge clock, he offered to test if the candle burned for the advertised 5 minutes or not. If the candle burns out before 5 minutes, the client can, well, he can have his way all night long with the girl. The unhappy man refused to believe these scammers and wasn't about to listen to the guy. Vlad calmly added that if the candle does burn the full time, he'll knock some sense into this loudmouth customer. The guy went silent, cold sweat beading on his face. He definitely noticed something weird was going on with the young candle seller's eyes. They were practically burning. The kid slowly brought a match to a brand new candle, ready to kick off this experiment. The dude was holding the girl by her hair, watching like a hawk as the candle burned on the floor near the kid's feet. Everyone in the house froze, totally hooked to see how this was gonna play out. The candle burned down and went out, and the whole time, everyone in the place watched in dead silence. The fat guy glanced back at the big clock, trying to figure out how much time had passed. He suddenly realized he hadn't even clocked what time they started burning the candle. A split second later, his face met a stick with a sickening thwack. Vlad landed a perfect shot to the jerk's face. The guy didn't see it coming and went down hard. The kid just calmly stated the candle burned for exactly 5 minutes, no scam involved. He kicked the cheat in the back like a stray dog underfoot. The guy went flying into a small room, which was empty at the moment. Vlad slammed the door shut behind him, so no one could stop him from doing what he had to do. The guy glared at the cheat and whispered in a deathly cold voice that his time was up. The guy was holding his bloody nose, begging him to stop. But Vlad was beyond reasoning with. He was beating the customer with a stick for trying to rip everyone off. He also reminded him to watch his mouth and leave people's mothers out of it. That night, the whole place heard Vlad dealing with the arrogant customer who tried to cheat the girls. The next morning at breakfast, Vlad spoke to Jorge, saying that he thought someone had messed with the candles. He stared at the guy, insisting the candles weren't burning the 5 minutes they were supposed to. The madam shrieked, totally baffled who would mess with her precious candles like that. She ordered Vlad to find out immediately who was bold and sneaky enough to pull something like this. Marcella smirked. She just wanted to have a little fun and made the candles burn faster, all to trick the drunks and rake in more cash off those sots. Walking down the stairs, the guy was thinking about how he just beat up that fat customer yesterday. His thoughts were cut off by Burley and his crew, who cheerfully mentioned he was proud of Vlad. He clapped the kid on the back and said everyone knew about the candle trick. They needed the money, so Marcella's been doing it for ages. Vlad wasn't in the mood to chat and just asked what he wanted. Burley was in a great mood. He replied that he wanted to strike a deal that would benefit everyone. For a reasonable price, he'll give back the little, clumsy pickpocket. The price is just 40 silver coins, a fair price for the kid's life. First, Vlad wanted to know what was up with the unlucky thief's hands and feet. Burley smirked and said if they were chopped off, he wouldn't be offering a ransom. He'd just leave him there. Vlad silently tossed a sack of silver coins on the floor as payment. He looked at the kid and told Burley next time, just off him instead of looking for him, he won't pay again. The guy said goodbye and asked not to be called a murderer. They're just bandits. As he left, he reminded his henchmen that he knew Vlad would agree right away, and it would be easy money. The little guy apologized. He tried to be careful, but something went wrong. Vlad just dryly asked if any of the kid's bones were broken. The kid, all bruised up, said he didn't think anything was broken. The candle merchant yelled at him to get lost, before he personally broke every bone in the little thief's body. The kid took off quick, but not before thanking his savior for everything. Vlad rubbed his neck, bummed about how fast he'd lost those 5 gold coins. On the bright side, the kid got off easy, luckier than Vlad's buddy did. Harvin, a member of Captain Hoover's whale hunting family, got messed up bad in a similar situation. Years ago, he lost a foot and some fingers on his left hand. He was totally clued in on everything that went down in the slums, so of course he'd heard about the candle scam. Harvin was convinced Madame Marcella had a specific reason for pulling a stunt like that. Vlad was dying to know what made the brothel owner start ripping off her customers. 90% chance she's desperate for a serious pile of cash, like yesterday. Harvin told Vlad to watch his back. There's only one reason the organization would need that kind of dough. Could be a new gang war brewing, which is why Marcella's scrambling for funds. 5 syndicates run the slums. First one's headed up by Jorge, the, Knight of the Night. The second crew is commanded by Black Bear, that pork butcher guy. The gambling dens are controlled by a thug everyone calls Dice. Old Captain Hoover, the whale hunter, runs the fourth. And the last syndicate is managed by Money Grub, one-armed Jack. This day was different, because Money Grub himself showed up at the establishment asking the candlemaker where Jorge was. Usually, things go down quick and dirty in the slums, and the damage creeps up on you. One-armed Jack didn't come around here much. He usually sent his boys. The candle merchant knew big changes were coming if a guy like that bothered to show up at the brothel himself. One of One-Armed Jack's goons started yelling at Vlad, asking where his syndicate boss was. The kid calmly replied he had no clue, since he was just a candle seller. The thug was clearly in a bad mood, and decided to take it all out on the young blonde. He knocked all the candles onto the floor and shouted for Vlad to get up and find the boss, pronto. The fragile goods that let the young man make a living crashed to the floor. The courtesans from the house watched the situation holding their breath, everyone worried about the guy. Vlad knelt down and started picking up the candles, whispering that there wouldn't be any sales today. He turned to the jerk and asked him to get his damn feet off the candles scattered on the floor. Jack One-Arm's goon didn't even catch on at first what this kid wanted from him. Vlad repeated his request, his eyes burning with blue fire. He wanted that lowlife to get his damn feet off the candles. The thug swung, wanting to teach this punk a lesson for his audacity and disrespect. Time seemed to freeze. Vlad knew a fight was a microcosm of war. It's made up of a designated battlefield and pre-planned circumstances. With one strike of the stick, he made sure the scumbag immediately lost his balance. This was followed by a second blow to the face of Jack One-Arm's insolent lackey. The working girls in the house were literally in shock at what was happening right in front of them. The main rule of the slums was being broken. The losers always at the bottom, and the winners always on top. The Money Bug gang grabbed their weapons, wanting to settle the score with this little smartmouth. But their boss blocked their path and demanded they stop. Pointing to the hook where his hand should be, the man asked them to cut him some slack, since he only had one limb. Vlad calmly replied that he doesn't discriminate against the differently abled. Money. Grub laughed loudly. He hadn't expected that kind of answer from the kid. Getting closer to the guy, he whispered that they'd talk later, when they were alone. Jorge interrupted the conversation, wanting to know what was going on. The pimp boss added that they should have given him a heads up, then he would have prepared some special treats for their guest. One-Armed Jack chuckled, saying they weren't that close that he'd be offering him special treats. Jorge suggested the guest come upstairs to talk, and Money Grub asked if they had any booze. The brothel owner assured him that Marcella was excellent at hospitality. One-Armed Jack said that in that case, he wouldn't mind heading upstairs to discuss everything. After the guest left, Vlad breathed a sigh of relief. He knew Jorge had practically saved his life. He looked dejectedly at the broken candles, feeling terrible that so much merchandise was ruined. As he cleaned up the candle remnants from the floor, he heard Jack address him. He chuckled, saying the boss wasn't shy with the compliments, meaning Jack had made a good call. A kid like Vlad wouldn't be a bad addition to One-Armed Jack's syndicate. Vlad scratched his head and replied that he was doing all right here. He got food, shelter, and pay. The man just laughed in response. He tossed the guy a coin and added that it was for the broken candles. Vlad caught it in the air. It was a gold piece. The young man politely told Jack that it was too much. The candles weren't worth that much. One-Arm offered the kid a job again, said he'd never have to worry about gold, 'cause that thug's called Money Grub for a reason. He raised his hook in the air, said that was delicious, and now they're out of here. The candle merchant figured Jack looked happy, so the talk must have gone well. Zemina, up on the second floor, told Vlad to come upstairs. Jorge wants to see him. The candle merchant went up and sat at the bar next to the syndicate boss. The guy held out a small dagger, said he wanted to give it to him later, but things changed. Jorge gave the kid a real serious look and told him to keep that weapon on him at all times. You could tell by the boss and Marcella's faces the negotiations went south. Jorge also said the kid shouldn't sell candles anymore. Vlad was totally caught off guard. The boss said intel came in about Jack. He's been recruiting ex-knights to join his gang. Vlad was getting worried. He asked the boss what kind of knights these guys were, if they were anything like Jorge. The man was clearly in a bad mood. He just dryly replied that these mercenaries were as much knights as he used to be. One-armed Jack had the biggest gang in the slums. But even with that, they couldn't beat Jorge. No matter how you slice it, a flock of sheep is no match for a wolf. But if Jack manages to recruit a bunch of swordsmen on the same level as, well, that guy, the balance will be shattered. The ex-knight honestly admitted they were at a disadvantage, which is exactly why he needed Vlad. He looked at the kid and added that he'd be giving him his first, very important assignment soon. Harvin, a cripple with missing fingers and a foot, used his sharp mind to learn math and writing, and started working for Captain Hoover. Looking at his friend, Vlad realized it was really important to study hard if you wanted to achieve any kind of success. During another training session, that weird voice popped up in the young man's head again. He kept saying I gotta tighten up the angle of my elbows when I swing. After getting blasted by that black lightning, the dude started hearing some freaky voice in his head. He figured before buying a sword, maybe he should grab some holy water, just in case. Vlad was sure he should just ignore it. The more he brushed off the voice, the faster it'd leave him alone. But the voice kept giving advice, telling him to bring his hands together, get ready, and then strike. He listened and did everything the weird voice told him, and Vlad swung. He'd practiced this technique a ton, but today was different. Before, he was just flailing around with a stick. But today, it was like he'd finally found the real path of the sword. The candle seller couldn't figure out what the heck was going on in his head. He wiped the blood off the sword. Can't fool old age. The cold cuts right through him now. Hearing the noises, the knight figured the stranger was either a moron or trying to lure him into a trap. He peered into the thick woods and told the stranger to come out willingly. A voice from the darkness asked if the man was Sir Stanga. The knight answered yes, and in return asked if Vlad was standing before him. The ex-knight had heard about a guide from the slums, a guy with blue eyes who looked like a nobleman. The young man handed over an envelope from his boss and asked the man to read it. From the message, he quickly understood why Jorge needed his help. The competition had hired some ex-knights. Vlad hurried the man. They needed to be there in 2 days, by nightfall. Sir Stanga replied coldly that he wouldn't want to follow someone so foolish. Vlad stopped and replied that he was the only one who knew the safe path and could lead the former knight. The guy was convinced you couldn't be smart if you did such dumb stuff. He also warned the kid that if he even suggested they were going the wrong way, the ex-knight would off him on the spot. Vlad turned his back and told him to keep up. He didn't want to screw up his first mission. Stanga was seriously surprised. He'd put on his meanest face, and the kid just blew it off. He immediately understood why Jorge valued the young man so much. The investment would pay off big time. After a long trek, they decided to take a break by the campfire. Stanga wasn't thrilled with the kid constantly staring at him. He asked Vlad if he'd never seen a retired knight before. The former candle seller politely replied that it was the first time he'd seen a knight up close. The man asked which village the kid was from. Vlad shot the question right back at him. The man coldly answered, Dikia. The former candle seller sarcastically remarked that Dikia must be a real metropolis. Stanga was pissed and told him not to cross the line, or he'd slice the punk in two. The kid pulled out some meat and told his buddy not to say such awful things. He heard knight jokes were just threats. The guy perked up the second he saw the meat, asking the kid if he'd share his dinner. But Vlad calmly explained he only got enough food for one person. Didn't the knight bring any supplies? The ex-knight pulled out some jerky that was harder than rocks. Vlad, meanwhile, started grilling the fresh meat, sticking it on wooden skewers. Stanga watched, drooling at the smell. He couldn't take it anymore and turned to Vlad, asking if the kid didn't want to ask him anything. He swore he'd honestly answer any question for a piece of meat. Slum dwellers didn't get opportunities like this every day. Vlad replied kindly that he could just ask for some meat and he'd share. But the former knight got angry. He had his pride. A knight always pays for what he gets. He's got to trade this meat for a favor, or at least answer some questions. Even though he's retired, Stanga still sticks to that principle. Vlad went right ahead and asked his real name. The knight answered, Stanga. The kid asked how old he was. The man said, 42. Vlad stared right through him and asked if the ex-knight could even use aura. The man closed his eyes and smiled. Now he understood his guide was only innocent on the surface. He also pointed out that not all knights can handle aura. Using it in a real fight is a whole different ballgame. Vlad just wanted a straight answer. Yes or no. He grabbed the roasted meat from the fire and offered it all in exchange for a demonstration of the knight's aura. Stanga gripped his sword and whispered that a knight only takes what he can pay for. He slowly started drawing his sword. There were times when he only did what he wanted, but he's been living on jerky for almost a week now. Sir Stanga drew his sword, got into fighting stance, and locked in. You could see on his face he was giving it everything he had. Vlad couldn't help himself and asked why the dude closed his left eye. The ex-knight whispered that he needed to awaken the world from the depths of his own soul. He told the kid to watch closely. He wasn't gonna repeat himself. Aura is nothing more than the true essence of knights. A bright light started flooding the night forest. Vlad shielded his face, totally stunned. Sir Stanga's sword began to glow with a blinding light, like the sun itself was inside the blade. After 2 days of travel, they got back to town. The guy was bummed. His clothes were dirty, but Vlad figured it worked in their favor. The guy meant his inner state. He didn't want to go through the slums. Vlad was saying the operation was top secret, and they had to sneak the knight in through the back entrance so the enemy wouldn't get wind of it. Vlad also promised the guy that once they arrived, he'd draw him a killer bath. It was way too quiet in the slums, even for the dead of night. In another alley, the travelers spotted a ton of bodies. Vlad realized the fighting had already kicked off. The kid suggested they split up. He'd fill the night in on the back entrance, the one only insiders knew about. Vlad, on the other hand, would head through the main entrance. Sticking together any longer would be a bad move. The ex-candle salesman darted into the brothel. Inside, it was a total madhouse. Marcella was bandaging up the wounded boss. Jorge calmly explained that the money grub had started it. The injured pimp pointed out he hadn't tangled with knights in ages, which is why he was so beat and busted up. What Jorge was really sweating was whether the kid had gotten Sir Stang there to help them out. Vlad was saying he pointed the ex-knight to the secret passage because the main entrance might be watched. Jorge was stoked. With Stanga, he could take care of one-armed Jack tomorrow. The boss wanted to know how Stanga was doing. Vlad said he's fine, and he actually seemed like a good guy. The ex-knight asked if his old buddy had lost weight. The candle seller said the guy was in top shape. Vlad also figured he'd mention he saw Stanga using an aura. Jorge's face changed instantly. He asked the kid to repeat what he'd just said. The kid said he saw the ex-knight using an aura. Jorge gripped his sword hilt and ordered him to get behind him. Now! A knight named Stanga never had the ability to use an aura. It was only now that Vlad was starting to realize he'd made a terrible mistake. A man with a sword walked slowly into the room, his clothes speckled with blood. Looking at Jorge, he said slowly that the guy had set up shop pretty far out. He squinted one eye, the other glowing with a weird light, and the knight added that it had been a while. Wiping the blood off his sword, he thought about how age catches up to you. This icy wind was cutting right through him. He slowly glanced back, then looked at him again. A broken sword, bloodied snow. The fight hadn't lasted long. Lying on the cold ground was the corpse of the real Sir Stanga, killed by the gray-haired knight. Now the killer stood facing Jorge with his sword drawn. The knights stared each other down, the killer quietly whispering that Jorge had changed a lot, and the pimp asked what brought him here, of all times. The uninvited guest broke the news that Count Guidera had passed on. The silver-haired knight poured himself some liquor, adding that due to certain complications, the Count's death hadn't been officially announced yet. Raising his full glass, he proposed a toast to poor Count Guidera. Jorge drew his sword and lunged at the uninvited guest. The silver-haired man watched it all through the glass of his liquor. He easily dodged the attack and added that he proposed a toast to the new Count Guidera, Sigmund. The knights clashed their weapons, staring each other down. The guest announced that the new Count's first order was to bring the deserter Jorge back. The syndicate boss was furious, roaring that Sigmund wasn't his master. The silver-haired knight expected that response. The Count wasn't expecting Jorge to come back willingly anyway. Vlad grabbed Marcella, told her it was dangerous, and tried to get her out of there. The ex-candle salesman hauled her into the back room, away from the fight. The thugs were clueless about what the hell was going on in the brothel. Vlad yelled at Burley to get everyone. Quick, Jorge was in deep trouble. He barely got the words out when the syndicate boss's body came crashing into the room. A white-haired knight burst through the broken wall after Jorge, looking to wrap things up fast. The knight figured the syndicate boss was still making bonehead moves. The syndicate boss was sprawled on the floor, wounded, and totally spent. Vlad chucked a dagger at the enemy, the one the boss had given him a few days back. Naturally, the experienced knight swatted it away like it was nothing. The killer and the ex-candle salesman locked eyes, staring each other down. The uninvited guest decided to end this and charged forward. Vlad yelled at Jorge to get out of the way. A brutal attack nearly sliced the guy in half, but the runaway knight dodged it just in time. He was practically out of juice and couldn't go toe-to-toe with this killer. The silver-haired knight suggested just following orders, and this whole thing would be over. The syndicate boss muttered that he's a man and doesn't take orders from any lowlife. The guest looked annoyed, then dryly replied that Jorge is a knight and needs to stick to the code. Then, he scanned the room and remarked that this knight was dragging on way too long. The man focused, his sword glowing with divine power. Vlad charged towards him, trying to stop the enemy. A weird glow lit up the whole room, beams of light hitting the syndicate members' faces. Jorge just looked on, his eyes tired and hopeless. The knight understood everything. A blinding flash lit up the establishment. Light blasted out of the windows and into the grim slum streets. Vlad coughed. It was all over. It was like a bomb went off inside. Dozens of dead thugs were lying on the floor. The kid somehow survived. The former candle seller was looking at one messed up scene. Jorge was the first person to reach out to the kid. He gave him shelter and started training him. The killer was holding the syndicate boss's severed head. With one strike, he shattered the kid's whole world. Without even thinking about what might happen, Vlad snatched up Jorge's sword. He let out a huge yell and charged at the silver-haired knight, looking for payback. This kid from the slums was swinging the sword like crazy, but he couldn't land a hit on the killer. The knight was seriously surprised, because that was definitely the way of the sword. But how could some street rat know something that only a select few are ever taught? Vlad was totally out of control. All he wanted was to take this guy down, right then and there. The knight dodged another attack and kicked the kid right in the chest. Vlad went flying across the room, but he managed to twist a little to soften the blow. Of course, the knight saw that, and he realized the kid had a natural gift. He told Vlad to breathe deep and try not to pass out. The guy didn't want to kill the kid. It was pointless to ruin his promising future. Even if one day, Vlad comes back with a sharper sword, looking for payback for Jorge. He remembered the past, how Jorge had seen the potential in the young kid. The man turned to Vlad and reminded him that a knight only takes if he can give something in return. The slum kid couldn't figure out what the killer was talking about. The silver-haired knight tossed chunks of meat at the kid. His name isn't Stanga, and he's not 42, so he's returning the extras. Vlad yelled after the knight that he'd find him and definitely kill him. The knight's name was Godin, and the kid swore he'd wait for the day he tracked down the killer and made him pay. Zemin and a beat-up Vlad stumbled through the dark alleys. The girl was helping the guy walk. His right side was killing him after that hit. He stopped dead, dropping to one knee. Pushing on was gonna be a bitch. He flashed back to Marcella, hauling him up when he was sprawled on the floor of that place. That woman ordered him to get his ass up, or he'd end up pushing daisies with the rest of the syndicate. She could see Vlad was totally lost. Everything that went down had messed him up, body and soul. She smacked him upside the head, good and hard, to snap him out of it. She roared at him that he wasn't a kid anymore and needed to get a grip, pronto. She glared at the blonde sitting on the floor and asked if he knew the difference between them and regular folks. The big difference between slum rats like them and the average Joe was opportunity. Regular people can afford to get back up when they fall. For slum dwellers, that's a freaking luxury. She told him to look at the corpses back at that joint. That's what happens from just one screw-up. Marcella grabbed him by the chest. In this neighborhood, mistakes are fatal. That's just how it is. With tears in her eyes, she yelled, "Don't throw away the chance of a lifetime." Zamina asked if her friend was okay. "Maybe we should rest?" The guy replied, "No way, we gotta keep moving." Jack One-Hand's goons showed up. "We gotta ditch this place, ASAP." Vlad grabbed his friend's hand, and together they bolted down the dark alley of the slums. Their syndicate was crushed, and now every thug in town wanted to finish off the survivors. Even though these kids were young, they had to fly or die. Vlad and Zamina managed to get away. The money grub's lackeys were trying to figure out where those two went. The guy who lost a few teeth in his last run-in with Vlad was now offering a reward for anyone who finds that punk. The slum kids took shelter in someone's house. They got lucky. The door wasn't locked tight. Vlad knew damn well that at this rate, they weren't getting out of the city alive. The guy told the girl to stay inside and keep her head down. He'd try to figure something out. The thugs were too close, and traveling together was a suicide mission. Zamina hated the plan. She didn't care about the danger, but she wasn't ditching Vlad. The guy reminded her that Marcella promised to help, but she had to be back at the convent before dawn. There was another option. Zamina could go to Harvin. The guy wouldn't refuse to help, but the stubborn girl didn't want to leave her friend. Vlad was getting worked up. He turned to her, asking if she really thought he could protect them both in his condition. Their talk was cut short. The homeowner heard voices and decided to check out who'd broken into his place. Zamina instantly grabbed the knife that was lying on the table. A man slowly entered the room with a lamp. The girl threatened him with the knife, telling him to stay back. Turns out the homeowner was a blacksmith who knew these street kids real well. The old guy asked why they broke into his place. The girl was waving a knife, telling him to stay back. He couldn't figure out what these young, ragged runaways from the slums wanted in his house at night. Zamina was dead serious. She warned the old man that if he moved, she'd cut him. The old blacksmith calmly whispered that he understood. He asked the girl to put the knife down first. She didn't want to give up the blade. She desperately needed that sword Vlad used to stare at for hours. The old man didn't catch on to what she was talking about right away. She needed that sword, the blacksmith's finest work, because it wasn't safe outside the city. That's just how it goes in the slums. People gotta take what they can to survive. The blacksmith felt really bummed out at that moment. He didn't want a bad end for these young strays. Vlad couldn't take it anymore and yelled at his friend to put the knife down and calm the hell down. She grabbed a fistful of her hair and held the knife to her head. Zamina hacked off her gorgeous hair, tears streaming down her face, begging him to give back the sword and promising to pay for it later. Right now, her hair is the only thing she can offer. Without the sword, Vlad's a goner. The blacksmith looked at the wounded guy and asked if he'd scram after this. Vlad said firmly that he'd leave this town immediately and wouldn't cause the old man any more trouble. The old man thought about how this kid was about to do something he himself never had the guts to do. It was clear that this young man would soon spread his wings. The blacksmith clutched his head and muttered that these young runaways had given him nothing but grief. Then he turned around and told them to hurry up and follow him before he changed his mind. In the dead of night, the old man hauled a massive junk-filled cart towards the city dump. Zemina couldn't stand the awful stench, but the blacksmith told her to quit complaining and just push the cart. As he left the city, a money grub patrol stopped him. The thugs wanted to know what the old man was doing at the dump so late. The blacksmith knew perfectly well they were the kind who could mess with his plan. One of the thugs asked the old man, "What's with dumping trash so late?" That question pissed off the old guy. He poked the thug and yelled that he had to work at night because the gangs were fighting and blocking the roads during the day. One of One-Armed Jack's goons noticed someone in a hood. Everyone knew the old man worked alone. The blacksmith shouted that he was too old, and this kid was helping him with the heavy lifting in exchange for some bread. The patrolman said he believed the only blacksmith in the slums, but he still had to check out his helper. He touched the tip of the hood with his sword, trying to flip it back and see who was under it. Then everything went silent. "Freeze! Don't move!" the guard barked, "or I'll accidentally lop something off." Zemina wailed, her face all twisted up. With that buzz cut, she didn't look like a girl at all. The thug felt a twinge of pity for the bum and waved them through. "Who goes looking for someone at night on the edge of town?" the blacksmith asked. The kid replied, "We're looking for Jorge's kid, a young guy with blue eyes." The old man was about to start pushing the cart again, but the guard stopped him once more. The bandit wanted to check the cart's contents, so he ordered his goon to do a search. Armed with a spear, One-Armed Jack's young fighter promised to get it done. He poked the spear into the pile of garbage on the cart. The stench was brutal. Zemina stared intently into his face. The kid gripped his spear tight. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "It's just my job." With incredible force, he jammed his spear into the mountain of trash piled on the cart. Zemina squeezed her eyes shut, while the old man braced himself for the worst possible outcome. The thug whispered that Harvin had started the vote down by the river. The spear missed Vlad by a hair, passing just inches from his face. The thug shouted to the patrol leader that everything was clear and there was nobody in the cart. This was Vlad's payment. 40 silver, the debt owed by that thug's little brother. Vlad couldn't thank Otar out loud, but he vowed to himself he wouldn't forget this day. Finally, the blacksmith and Zemina reached a small tunnel where the city's garbage is dumped. The girl couldn't hold back her tears. She cried and begged Vlad to be careful. Clutching his sword, Vlad tumbled down the tunnel along with the huge pile of garbage. He plummeted off a massive cliff right into this city's garbage heap, but the kid survived. He had a reason to. Sitting by the fire, he picked up the new sword and asked the mysterious voice in his head if it could hear him. The voice said yes. Vlad wanted to know who he really was. The voice didn't know who it was. It was weird, like this voice knew everything about swords but couldn't remember himself. The slum kid promised he'd help the voice get its memories back, in exchange for help. Even if he's talking to a straight-up demon, he doesn't care. This kid wants revenge. The kid promised to be a dedicated student. He wasn't afraid of demons. The only thing he's scared of right now is ending up a nobody who can't get revenge for Jorge. The voice in his head promised to tell him everything it knew about his sword. The second son of the Bayezid family, Joseph, looked at the map and thought this was all way too easy. My train of thought was cut off by my loyal servant, who came to deliver some important news. His name was Jaeger, a courageous knight who lost an eye in battle. He immediately noticed something was bothering his lord. Young Joseph's gaze was way too troubled. The young nobleman had reviewed everything several times and felt it was all too easy, which never bodes well. The loyal comrade reported that subduing the monster was going smoothly, with only minor losses, mostly among the hired guns. The young lord was worried about the deserters. If things didn't change, everyone would start doubting his ability to lead. His father and his vassals were just a given, not something grand he'd achieved himself. Rudiger, his older half-brother, who never gave Joseph a moment's peace. Everything will go to hell if Joseph can't become the next earl. Rudiger will try to seize the throne. After all, the Bayezid family has always been famous for its armies. Way back when, Joseph's own father fought his blood brothers for the title of Count. Now, the heir was desperate for some top-tier swordsman. Jaeger was a great knight, but he needed a few more just as badass. Jaeger turned to his lord. He had some intel that might just make Joseph's day. The loyal knight started talking about some weird soldier, and Joseph immediately thought it was a spy sent by his brother. The devoted servant figured it was better to see it all firsthand than listen to some long-winded explanation. They stared at the goblin's corpse, its chest ripped open with deep gashes. The young lord held a handkerchief to his face, looking at the whole scene with disgust. He figured it was the work of some kid who just picked up a sword. Jaeger suggested the heir take a look at one very interesting detail. The sight was pretty grim. The young heir couldn't take the handkerchief away from his face. He even started to feel a little sorry for the goblins he'd offed. Suddenly, Joseph realized that every goblin corpse had the same wounds, like they were all taken out by the same person. The heir of the Bayezid family turned to Jaeger, asking if he was understanding this right. All around them were a couple dozen monsters, brutally wasted. Jaeger calmly confirmed his master's suspicions. These goblins were delivered here yesterday. The bodies with wildly different wounds were found a month ago. The heir was surprised at the knight's progress in such a short time. There's just no way someone goes from total noob to skilled knight in a month. The earl's heir wanted to know who was so talented they could make that kind of leap in a month. Mercenaries were fighting a small squad of nimble but useless goblins. One of the warriors ordered them to close ranks, so the enemies couldn't bolt. These overgrown freaks ain't much of a threat. Looks like this fight's gonna be over quick. This cocky merc wanted to wrap things up fast, told his buddies to pick up the pace. A massive monster snuck up from behind, way bigger than the regular goblins. This savage beast is swinging a huge club, gonna be a real pain to deal with. One hit, and he flattened that cocky merc. This thing's a straight-up killer, big and strong. The monster roared loud, like it was daring the mercs to come at him. This monster's tearing through the soldiers like it's nothing. They can't even scratch him. In a heartbeat, these confident warriors felt the fear creep in. They knew they were outmatched. The squad leader was sitting on his horse, watching the whole thing go down. He yelled that if they didn't take down that beast, they wouldn't get paid a dime. These mercs had no clue a hobgoblin was here. They're outmatched. We need some top-tier knights ASAP. The squad leader was seeing red. Someone dared to talk back. He hated deserters more than anything. Meanwhile, the hobgoblin was totally enraged, stomping his way towards the mercenary commander. The guy was getting a bad feeling seeing this huge beast just wreck his soldiers like toys. Out of nowhere, a blonde dude with blue eyes showed up on the battlefield. The mercs cheered. It was Riemann the Prayer, their hope for survival. The young guy calmly said he'd handle the monster himself and told them to stay out of his way. He drew his sword and charged at the hobgoblin like lightning, wanting to get this over with quick. A sharp strike wounded the monster, but didn't kill it. The thing let out a deafening roar. The beast tried to smash the blonde with its club. A voice in his head screamed at him to dodge. Hobgoblin was strong, all right, but he was slow and clumsy as hell. Riemann the Prayer was a little ticked off. He didn't take down that beast with one shot. The voice in his head was pissed, said he'd told the kid a bunch of times how to do it, but he still screwed up. Waiting for the perfect opening, Vlad decided to land his signature move and end this fight. Joseph asked Jaeger to dig up everything he could on this Riemann guy, said he was interested in this merc. The comrade bowed respectfully and promised he'd get it done. The earl's heir looked at the slain goblins, wondering how the warrior had mastered the sword path in a month. Vlad threw just one punch, and the hobgoblin's head went flying like a damn football. After the fight, the soldiers were cleaning up the monster corpses, griping about how there wasn't anything valuable left after the monsters died. One of the mercs turned to Captain Riemann, telling him he thought the guy was awesome. The warrior told them to shut their traps and get his loot loaded onto the carts. The merc promised to do the job right and suggested they work together again sometime. But the blonde shot him down, saying he didn't want to deal with crooks and scammers. Goes pointed out that the captain couldn't exactly use his mercenary title solo. Vlad turned around and warned that too much yapping could lead to a quick dirt nap. Goes clammed up instantly, scared by the guy's menacing glare. The scammer tried to smooth things over, babbling about how much money they could make with the captain's gift. Vlad coldly told him to get back to cleaning up, or the merc would be kissing his head goodbye. Goes realized there was no point arguing, promised he'd get it done, and bolted. Vlad knew damn well he'd have to deal with this loudmouth again soon. The young warrior headed into the woods. The mercenaries saw him and figured he was going to pray again. The blonde dropped to one knee and pressed his sword to his forehead. The guys watching all thought Riemann was a real nobleman. Vlad was seriously bummed that he couldn't take down that hobgoblin in one shot. The voice in his head was in a bad mood, kept saying that attack needed to catch the target completely off guard. It was like the 100th time he'd said, "Sword up," enemy goes, "Shh." Vlad goes, "Bang." Sounded like gibberish to a kid from the slums. The voice went back to the whole "shh" and "bang" tactic. The blonde just couldn't wrap his head around what it meant. Prayer time was over. Time for lunch. Riemann lifted his spoon and stared at his food. The food was free, so the mercenaries didn't care if there was meat in their bowls or not. Hard to find a job that pays and feeds you, but the Bezid family took care of that. Riemann got up from the table, wished everyone a good meal. The mercenaries were whispering about him going to see the priest again. Father Andres was happy to see the young warrior. He greeted Riemann warmly. The blonde bowed and asked the clergyman if he'd rested well. The priest had heard the kid was up all night praying again, even though it was freezing out. Riemann replied that in God's embrace he felt no cold. Actually, Vlad was trying to get a handle on things. Father Andres was touched, remarking that the young man had become a greater priest than he himself was. The church boy came up to the old man and said that lunch was ready. Reverend Andres seated his guest at the table to share the meal together. Before eating, they had to pray, and the priest reminded everyone. He watched Riemann praying his heart out and figured he was probably the most devout believer he'd ever seen. Andres knew he needed to keep a close eye on a warrior whose hands would always be stained. After the prayer, the priest asked the young captain to dig in and eat. On the table was some killer wheat bread and a bowl of thick, hearty soup. The Reverend mentioned that a certain young lord was interested in Riemann and wanted to meet him in person. Andres explained that he'd put in a good word for the young captain with Joseph. Vlad immediately realized things were starting to slip out of his grasp. The Reverend reminded him that the Bezid family was well known up north, and working for them would unlock a ton of opportunities for a talented guy. Riemann's a top-notch warrior and a devoted parishioner. He deserves a great future. After lunch, Vlad headed into the woods. He needed to get some advice from the voice in his head. The mysterious voice explained that getting close to the priest was a bad move. But Vlad did it on purpose. He wanted to test the nature of the voice in his head. Rumor had it the Reverend had great divine power. Everyone expected him to become a bishop, and if he didn't detect anything demonic in the voice, then everything was fine. Vlad wanted advice on whether he should stay or run, and the voice figured they might just look the other way on his little deception. The kid knew it was only a matter of time before everyone found out he killed the mercenary and stole his name. The voice in his head joked, calling him a real piece of work, and Vlad snapped back, saying it's because of who he's partnered with. The voice finally suggested he bolt, and Vlad agreed he'd do it tonight. Suddenly, the voice in his head sensed someone approaching, a skilled knight. Vlad grabbed his sword and spun around, not letting the stranger sneak up on him. Standing before him was a tall man, with a black patch over his left eye. Jaeger was a little surprised. The kid sensed him coming, which meant he was way more skilled than he thought. He greeted him calmly, saying that young Master Joseph wanted to meet Riemann in person. Vlad knew perfectly well that there was no escape now. He remembered you gotta have a poker face to play cards, so he replied cool as a cucumber that it would be an honor. Jaeger asked if the young warrior knew they were coming for him. The kid said the priest told him everything. The loyal servant of the county's heir was stunned that the kid wasn't scared of him at all. Jaeger turned around and told him to follow. For a second, Vlad thought about making a run for it, but a voice in his head told him not to even think about it. A knight as experienced as Jaeger would take him out instantly. He wouldn't even make it 3 steps. Sheathing his sword, the slum kid realized he just didn't have any other choice. Joseph, reading his book and noticing the talented mercenary had arrived, said he was glad to see him. Vlad bowed respectfully and replied that it was a great honor for him. Without looking up from his book, the heir inquired if the mercenary had experienced any difficulties. Riemann replied that everything was fine. The younger son of the Bayezid family correctly observed that the blonde with blue eyes must be a nobleman. The master asked if it was true his name was Riemann. The mercenary bowed and confirmed that it was. Joseph slammed the book shut. There was something he should have said sooner. Jaeger slapped the young warrior hard. Vlad couldn't dodge the blow. Vlad immediately realized they'd seen through him a long time ago. They knew his mother wasn't married, but they couldn't find any info on his real father. Joseph looked at Vlad, then asked if he knew who his real father was. The guy responded that it was pretty low to ask about his father when his mother was an unmarried woman. Jaeger didn't hesitate to take a swing at the merc's leg for that disrespect. The knight reminded him that nobody talks trash like that to the heir. Joseph explained to Vlad that they already knew why he'd bolted from Swara. The Earl's youngest son was dying to know where the kid learned to handle a sword like that. Vlad just stared at the guy, not saying a word. The Bayezid family heir noticed those blue eyes were hiding way too much. Jaeger was standing right behind Vlad, slowly drawing his sword. The kid said he had a teacher who showed up out of nowhere and vanished just as fast. The teacher told Vlad one secret, and he's sticking to it. The one who always wins never spills their guts to anyone. Joseph apologized for being so rough. He gets it now. The Earl's youngest son cut right to the chase, explaining he was in a tight spot and had a proposition. Addressing the guy by his real name, he asked if Vlad from Swara was interested in moving up the ladder. If he agreed, power, freedom, and knighthood would be waiting for him. Joseph Bayezid was ready to back a talented young man. Training with Jaeger was no walk in the park. The knight was a skilled warrior. The mercenaries watched with bated breath. Not everyone could spar with Jaeger. A lot of folks figured Riemann would be Master Jaeger's successor. He's got what it takes. Despite the difficulty, Vlad managed to parry the wooden sword attacks. The teacher didn't like how arrogant the kid was, always looking down his nose at everyone. He wasn't holding back on the kid, even though there was a huge difference in their strength and skill. Vlad knew damn well Jaeger was on another level. Dodging was impossible, and blocking his hits was a struggle. So, he decided to go for a counterattack. Of course, Jaeger managed to block the move, but Vlad's sword was way too close to his neck. The mercenaries standing nearby were totally stunned by what they were seeing. Surprisingly, Jaeger was actually pleased. He complimented the kid and said he did a good job. But Vlad wasn't happy. He knew he'd been allowed to do that. Jaeger was a seriously powerful knight. He could end any fight with a single blow. The instructor looked at the kid and said they'd be sparring twice a day now, morning and evening. Vlad was floored. The man also told him to take care of himself and not catch a cold. Then he walked off. Vlad noticed Jaeger wasn't much of a talker, but the voice in his head was blown away by the knight's skill. The mentor ruthlessly cut away all unnecessary movements. Vlad was learning through sparring. Jaeger reported to the young master that the kid could be useful. If he'd been from a noble family, the Earl would have snatched him up. Joseph was stoked. Looks like his gut feeling was right this time. There was one thing the knight didn't like. The kid was way too cocky. The Earl's younger son smirked. The kid grew up in the slums, so it wasn't a surprise. Looking at his loyal subject, he added that the knight would teach the guy etiquette and swordsmanship. An ally of the Bayezid family heir believed that a treacherous blade shouldn't be trusted. Joseph agreed. If the guy walked around with his head down, he wouldn't trust him either, so it's better if he shows what he's made of. Judging by Vlad's look, he had something he absolutely had to do. If that's how you see it, boss, then I'm with you all the way. Vlad's not a real wolf yet. He's too young and cocky. Joseph told the knight to take it slow. We need time to build a big enough cage, one so big the kid mistakes captivity for freedom. Goze was on patrol that night, and the weather was absolutely brutal. The mercenary was thinking about how Riemann was now serving under Master Jaeger. He moved closer to the torch, trying to get a little warmth. The squad captain came up from behind and asked how things were looking. Goze glanced at the knight and said nothing out of the ordinary was happening. He swore he'd stay sharp on his watch and told the commander not to worry. The mercenary knew the captain wouldn't be back for a while after his rounds, which meant he could catch some Z's. He barely closed his eyes when he heard the captain's voice. The guy was talking to someone. The knight was asking someone about a kid. Searching for a child in the woods at this hour was messed up. Guts heard the captain call someone a total nutcase. The mercenary gripped his spear tighter. The captain suddenly went silent. He was following the squad leader, but the guy was heading in the opposite direction from the camp. Guts noticed some kind of weird, dark shadow around the knight, and then he saw a woman's disfigured face, looked like a demon's snout. Vlad's whole body ached after another training session. Jaeger was brutal. A mysterious voice was trying to explain that not every newbie gets to fight a JR. This is a golden opportunity. Vlad thought the guy just wanted to beat him up, but the other dude explained it was time to train his willpower. It's crucial in a fight. The voice in my head suddenly shut up. Someone was calling Riemann from the woods. It was Goze, peeking out from behind a tree, telling him to get over there, quick. He told Vlad he was done fighting and was planning on ditching this place tonight. He hadn't told anyone, but he respected Captain Riemann, so he was willing to share the intel. Vlad had absolutely no clue what this freaked-out weirdo was talking about. Goze pointed towards the forest, then added that it was cursed. Vlad couldn't wrap his head around what his buddy meant. What curse was he talking about? The merc brought up the story about the deserters. It was weird, since they were getting paid well and even getting fed. The thing is, that cursed forest took them. They didn't desert. Last night, Goze personally saw a woman's ghost snatching people. Vlad didn't buy it and wanted to smack the merc upside the head to get him to stop lying. But Goze swore he was telling the truth. Even the knight in charge of their squad had vanished. The blonde was shocked. No way Lord Roderick deserted, that's impossible. Goze noticed a weird pattern he couldn't explain. Everyone who'd gone missing recently had nothing but black hair. Goze was freaking out. He needed to bail himself, but now there's a search party led by Jaeger. The knight asked Vlad if they could trust the merc. The guy said no, but he didn't seem totally nuts. Jaeger understood that this was a golden opportunity for the Lord to make a name for himself. But he was seriously bugged that all the missing guys were dark-haired men. Vlad pointed out that 3 knights had held the position before. Jaeger thought they were all useless. Roderick was a seasoned warrior. The fact he's missing is a huge red flag. Goetze reported they reached the squad that went out scouting this morning. The group leader introduced himself as Aaron, a follower of Sir Roderick. He reported that he and his squad combed the entire forest, but couldn't find a trace. Experienced mercenaries searched the area all day, but came up empty. Jaeger sighed heavily. Looks like he's got to handle this personally. The knight ordered everyone to split into 3 groups and not stray too far from each other. Goetze was getting anxious. He didn't understand why he was being treated like this. He shared the information because he respected Vlad. He never thought it would turn into a full-blown search op. Jaeger asked if they found anything in the forest. Vlad sadly replied no. The knight wanted to know how a street kid like him was tracking missing people. The blonde guy said it was simple. You get it after you beat the crap out of someone. Jaeger muttered that the kid was useless with that kind of attitude. Sun's going down, day's done, which means it's time to head back to camp. The knight's attention was drawn to the frozen river. He asked if they'd searched beyond it. A surprised Goze mumbled that nobody had crossed the river. It wasn't part of the plan. Jaeger figured there was nothing in the woods, so they needed to check the area across the river. He ordered everyone to gather up. They were heading across the river to the other side of the woods. The ice is already starting to melt, but if they hurry, they can cross the river without anything bad happening. Since the ice isn't strong, they need to split into 3 groups to minimize the risk. The mercs edged forward real slow across the frozen water. Goze thought this whole plan was messed up. He didn't want to go any further. He had a bad feeling about it and begged Vlad to turn back. The blonde thought the kid was just spooked. The merc didn't deny it. He wasn't exactly Mr. Brave Captain. Guys like him only survive with good instincts, and right now, his gut was screaming at him to bail. Vlad shot back that if he ran now, he'd be a coward forever. The only witness hightailing it from the scene? That's gonna look super sus. So, the only smart move right now is to cross the river with everyone else. Goze followed Vlad, but he still thought crossing the river was a seriously bad call. Every few feet, he'd stop and say the ice was about to crack. The merc hit the ice, whining he couldn't go any further. Vlad grabbed him by the collar. They were the only ones lagging behind the group. Goetze yelled out, staring at the frozen surface of the river. Under the thick ice were the bodies of those branded as deserters. The merc's loud cries caught Jaeger's attention. The man turned around. Beneath them were tons of corpses of battle buddies who'd gone missing from camp. The ice started cracking, a terrifying noise spreading across the river area. The soldiers' corpses broke through the ice, their hands sticking out everywhere. They weren't human anymore. Now they were like zombies, craving living flesh. Super fast, the soldiers were surrounded on all sides. An army of the dead was ready to attack. The mercs were frozen, waiting for Jaeger's orders. The knight knew right away it was a trap. Someone had planned this out perfectly. The zombies' eyes were pure darkness. They weren't human anymore. Reverend Andres was holding evening service at the camp. He prayed to God to guide them with his light so they could stay on the righteous path. During the prayer, the deacon noticed something weird and turned to the priest. The holy water in the big cup started bubbling. That wasn't a good sign. Andres was shocked. This was a bad omen. The reverend asked God to protect them. A woman walked across the frozen ice, searching for her child. She was consumed by one thought: finding her kid. The zombies started swarming the soldiers, like they were taking orders from someone. Vlad took out one of the living dead that was trying to get to Goze. There were way too many of the undead, and they felt no fear. Vlad knew damn well a fight was coming, so he went on the offensive. He saved that motormouth merc, who was so freaked out he dropped his spear. Vlad was yelling at him, telling Goze to pick up his weapon and get in the fight. The voice in his head was calm, telling him not to sweat it and to pick a direction first. Blondie was seriously worried about Master Jaeger. The kid needed to know if the knight was okay. But the guy knew no fear. His steady hand, gripping that sword, was mowing down zombies left and right. He fought bravely, but it wasn't enough. The dead were taking out the other mercenaries. No time for second-guessing here. I had to unleash my aura, or we were all toast. The patch over his left eye started glowing green. In a flash, a blinding aura lit up the whole frozen river. He took out like a dozen enemies with one shot. That really fired up the mercs. They realized these zombies weren't invincible, that they could be killed. Jaeger was crushing it, taking down the undead like it was nothing. He glanced at the kid and yelled for Vlad from Soara to fulfill his contract. The SLUM kid heard the shout and turned around. He was trying to figure out what exactly he was supposed to do. In the heat of battle, Jaeger explained that he needed to get back to his post and look after Master Joseph. Vlad didn't argue. He just confirmed he understood the knight's orders. "SLUM kid," Goze yelled. "We gotta get back to camp ASAP." Jaeger was praying to God that everyone he sent to protect Joseph made it there safe and sound. He met him, someone he'd known for years. The knight apologized for being late. It was Sir Roderick, who'd gone missing last night. Joseph heard shouting coming from outside his tent. He knew right away it was an invasion. But who had the nerve? The captain showed up, totally disrespecting protocol, addressing the Lord all wrong. Vordan was super freaked out, stumbling over his words. Joseph was pissed. Not only was this guy breaking etiquette, he couldn't even explain what was going on. The guy babbled something about the Earl's youngest son being in serious danger. Joseph was seeing red. If things were this dangerous, why the heck did Vordan come without his sword? The camp was such a mess. The loyal vassal spaced on his weapon. The young lord snapped back that if his father were here, Vordan would already be swinging for incompetence. The man bowed low, begging forgiveness for his screw-up. A priest walked into the tent with 2 warriors and a little deacon. The Earl's youngest son was glad to see the Reverend. Maybe he could explain what happened. Andres opened the Bible, adding that it was written in sacred ink. There's some serious evil going down because the lines inside are shaking like in a storm. The young lord asked if there was a way to stop it, but the priest said he wasn't an exorcist. He can't fight something like that, but he'll try to tap into his divine powers. Joseph knew that none of the remaining knights possessed an aura. Right now, only 3 people could protect him. He decided they had to move out immediately, not wait for the enemy. The camp was in chaos. Zombies were swarming the soldiers. Joseph noticed a weird fog rolling in, blanketing the people. This magic was messing with their heads, turning them into mindless monsters. The young lord covered his face with a cloth. It was the only way to survive. He couldn't breathe that stuff in. The priest was certain this wasn't natural, but the work of some dark magic user. A possessed woman appeared in the camp, searching for her child. The sight of her stunned the priest and the deacon. They were both frozen solid. She was stumbling, but kept moving forward, never stopping her search for her kid. Suddenly, the thing stopped, and looking at Joseph and the people nearby, whispered, "My child." The woman opened her mouth wide and yelled that she'd finally found her baby. Her gaze was fixed on Joseph. She saw her son in him. The ghost's body began to glow with a bright light, and reaching out her hands, she walked towards the Earl's heir. The priest started praying to God, begging him to protect them from evil. He created some kind of protective barrier that was supposed to hold back the woman's ghost. Joseph knew perfectly well that without Jaeger, they wouldn't be able to kill the monster. Cade and Maxime fell victim to the mist. They were too weak. The woman was trying to break through the barrier, repeating that it was her child. The Earl's youngest son figured this whole thing was a curse, and it was aimed right at him. The deacon started coughing up blood. His body couldn't handle the fog and the evil vibe. The priest begged the kid not to give up, that the sun would shine again for sure. The woman managed to shove her bony hand right through the barrier. The kid kept praying to God, begging for his help. Joseph could see the deacon was at his limit. He wouldn't be able to hold back the evil for much longer. This was a total disaster. They probably wouldn't make it till sunrise. Just when it looked like the end was coming, Vlad showed up on the horizon. His sword and body were glowing with a blue light. It was a knight's aura. After he got back to camp, a voice explained the woman was moving because of the curse's power. A normal sword wouldn't take her down. The guy asked if Vlad could use aura, but the SLUM kid figured the voice was messing with him. The invisible mentor said there was one way to take down their opponent. If Vlad let him take over his body for a bit, the voice would use aura and waste that creature. The kid was skeptical if that was even possible, but the invisible mentor explained that he could use his aura. But there was a risk that Vlad couldn't handle the strain. The SLUM kid knew this was the only play. Otherwise, everyone was toast. He gave his okay for the voice to take control of his body. Vlad promised Joseph he'd serve him, and now he can't break that deal. The voice demanded that the kid shut his right eye. Everything warped like he'd been dropped into a world of voices. The sword started glowing, infused with an aura, powerful and pure. Like a bolt of lightning, it struck the camp, felling the woman with a devastating blow. The wraith screamed. That hit was fatal to the creature. Stunned, Joseph couldn't believe his eyes. How could this even happen? A kid from Sawara, raised in the slums, could control knightly aura. The voice controlling his body had consequences. It hit the guy hard. The Earl's heir shouted the loyal mercenary's name. Vlad was in pain and couldn't get up from the ground. It was the after effect of contact with the dark aura. It's a wonder the kid survived. The wounded woman crawled towards Vlad, whispering something about her child. Joseph rushed to the guy, begging him to get up and keep fighting. He hauled the blue-eyed kid off the ground, telling him to finish what he started. The woman reached out her bony hands toward them. She just wanted to embrace her child. At the last second, she managed to grab the heir's leg. The Earl's younger son cursed his weak body. He couldn't even break free without help. Luckily, Vordan arrived just in time, grabbed the Lord from behind, and apologized. He managed to throw Joseph and Vlad a few yards ahead, away from the ghost. Despite the rough landing, the heir thanked the knight. Vlad got up off the ground and asked the Holy Father to bless his sword. He needed to free this woman from her secret as soon as possible. Reverend Andres nodded, understanding perfectly. He sliced his palm, sprinkled blood on the blade, and blessed the weapon. Stumbling, the slum kid set off to finish what he started. He approached the possessed woman lying on the ground. She begged for help finding her child. Her son was all she had. Vlad's face darkened. He caught a glimpse of her past life. They kept her locked up in a dark basement. She pleaded for her child back. Her frail baby lay nearby on the cold floor. She begged the kidnappers to return her son, weeping bitterly and reaching for him. The worst thing a woman can experience. She watched her son slowly fade away. Vlad raised the blessed sword above his head and whispered for her to rest in peace. He plunged the sword into her body so she could find eternal rest. Her human form returned. Vlad was the last thing she saw before dying. The dark mage used a dark aura on some kind of chest to control the woman. Suddenly, everything stopped. He no longer sensed her presence. It was a mystery to him what happened. Only a knight with an aura could have taken out his puppet. Jaeger found him in the woods, not far from the frozen river. The next morning, Joseph asked his loyal subject who was to blame for all this. The knight held the warlock's severed head in his hand. In his other hand was a strange wooden box. Jaeger figured that's what the cursed woman was after. It was like a kid's tantrum inside, and that dark magic user puppeted the poor guy's son to control the woman. Joseph asked them to hand the coffin over to the priest. He'll keep looking into this when he gets back to Varna. The heir thought the mission was a bust, but deep down he was relieved. Jaeger was curious how Vlad from Swara had handled things. The Earl's youngest son smirked. He figured he'd found someone who could be his weapon. The kid was like a sword, shining brighter than all the other mercenaries. Vlad shot out of bed, not believing he'd slept straight for 3 days. A mysterious voice warned him the fallout would be rough. All in all, Vlad was glad nobody had left without him. The mercs were still at camp. The guy explained nobody was supposed to wait for him, but Joseph was really worried about Vlad. Stepping out of the tent, the young man noticed the guards were gone, like they'd all abandoned their posts. Goza came running up, all smiles, happy his captain was finally awake. The mercenary wasn't about to ditch Vlad, not after Vlad promised him a sweet payday. He was the one who dragged Vlad back to camp after that fight so the warrior could get some rest. Vlad said he wouldn't forget it and would definitely tell Joseph about Goza's loyalty. The mercenary said that Jaeger and the Count's son were already waiting for Vlad in the main tent. Before leaving, Goza asked Vlad again to tell the heir about his heroic deed. Joseph slowly poured wine into a fancy glass, asking the guy if he drank liquor. The blonde guy sheepishly replied that he used to work at a certain establishment, but never got to taste expensive wine. The Count's younger son held up a luxurious bottle, noting it was a drink for the high rollers. First off, the Bayezid heir wanted to thank the merc for not ditching him that night. Vlad quietly replied that they had a deal, and he couldn't break it. It was just a verbal agreement, but the kid stuck to it anyway. The heir couldn't afford to lose a warrior like that. He was dreaming of making Vlad his most loyal soldier. Pushing a wine glass towards the young man, Joseph added that it was his turn to fulfill his part of their bargain. Looking into the young man's blue eyes, the heir said he wanted to welcome Vlad into the Bayezid family. Varna, a major city, is the heart of the Bayezid family's holdings. Jaeger reported that he'd sent all the mercs to get some R&R. The heir asked to stay here for a day. He needed to finish the campaign report. Vlad had never been in a city this huge before. He kept craning his neck, not knowing where to look. Jaeger asked if it was Vlad's first time in a big city like this. The kid bashfully replied that every city was new to him. The knight muttered with a touch of disdain that the guy was a total hick. The Earl's youngest son, being a stand-up guy, gave him the day off to check out the city. Jaeger told Vlad not to get lost and to be back at City Hall for dinner. The voice in his head thought Jaeger was really looking out for him, but the kid wasn't so sure. He'd made decent coin on that campaign, which meant he could grab something good to eat. His food fantasies were cut short by a deacon who looked like he had something important to say. The priest was real eager to invite the young warrior over to his place. This news was a major shock to a kid who came from the slums. The cathedral in Varna was massive, totally mind-blowing with its size and grandeur. Vlad was floored. The chapel back in Soar wasn't nearly this huge. The deacon pointed out that Bayezid Sutram is the capital, but the religious center is here in Varna. The kid asked me to wait inside. Reverend Andres will be here soon. Vlad stepped inside and froze. He was stunned by the kind of luxury he'd never seen before in his life. Everyone called him Praying Riman, even though he never actually prayed. Realizing that, he felt super awkward, like he was fooling everyone. A priest came up from behind and apologized for keeping him waiting. Vlad bowed and replied that it was no problem at all. He was happy to be invited. The reverend held something out in his hand and asked the warrior to take it. It was his personal ID, something he never even dreamed of before. The church made these special IDs because God's blessing extends everywhere. The guy who vouched for him on the ID, none other than Father Andres himself. The priest even said Vlad shouldn't hesitate to come to the church right away if he ever hit a rough patch. So now the padre's his guarantor, kinda like a guardian. A kid born in the slums getting an ID, vouched for by a big-shot priest like Andres? It was beyond his wildest dreams. Everything changed that day. He wasn't just Vlad from the slums anymore. He was someone else now, not some street rat, but Vlad of Sawara. Count Bayezid's holdings included 12 villages and 3 whole towns. His power also extended to the Sawara trading hub. Even Varna, which was considered a religious center, belonged to the Bayezid family. The capital of this empire was Sturma, the city where the Count and his family lived. Jaeger warned the mercs that they were Joseph's guests, and any screw-up would reflect badly on him. Vlad and Goza listened to the knight's briefing in silence, not interrupting him. Jaeger added that drinks would be brought to them soon, and asked them not to touch anything. The young guys didn't quite grasp all the family's rules and customs. Before leaving, the man asked them not to eat anything, or everyone would think they have no manners, and bad rumors would spread like wildfire through the house. Vlad tried to say they could use a bite, but the knight quickly cut him off and forbade them from eating anything. Vlad and Goz entered a huge living room. It was stunning in its opulence. Only now did Goz realize that the Bayezid family was seriously powerful. A man stood behind the curtain. He said loudly that he hadn't seen these young men before. Vlad instantly knew who was standing before him, even though he was seeing him for the first time. Rudiger Bayezid, the Earl's eldest son, wanted to know who these young guys were. Vlad immediately sensed his aura. It was on a completely different level. He was so strong he could cleave a man in two with a single sword stroke. Goz bowed, gave his name, and explained that they were accompanying Joseph on the campaign. The slum kid coolly stated his name and hometown. Rudiger immediately noticed that the blonde was a very unusual youth. The guy had fierce blue eyes and didn't tense up at all at the sight of Rudiger. The Earl's eldest son thought that Joseph had acquired an excellent subject. Taking some nuts out of his pocket, he offered the guests a snack. Vlad slowly replied that they weren't allowed to eat them yet, so he would have to decline the offer. Goz was floored. Could his buddy really turn down the Earl's heir that easily? Even Rudiger was surprised the merc passed on the peanuts. First day in the Bayezid house, and Vlad from Swara's already turning down food. The head of the Bayezid family was busy with business, chatting with his son at the same time. He got hooked on the story about Vlad. They haven't had any standout nights in the house since Jaeger showed up. The old man promised to reward his son big time if he could whip Vlad into a decent night. Joseph bowed and thanked his own father for being so generous. The Earl knew damn well swordplay wasn't his younger son's strong suit, but he told the heir to never forget he's a Bayezid. Joseph bowed humbly again and swore to do what his father wanted. The Earl asked how his youngest son was feeling, if he was doing any better. The heir said everything was fine, and his father, hearing that, told Joseph he could get back to his business. After his son left, the Earl told his advisor that they needed to get the kid patched up. Miss Oksana would appreciate it. That woman was fiercely protective when it came to her son. Then, the Earl asked Ragmus what he thought about Joseph's report. The old man replied that they needed to pay extra close attention to this. The Earl wanted to know who was behind all of this, who dared to pull this kind of stunt on his land. The report from Varna says this is some seriously nasty curse magic, raising the dead and all. It wasn't clear if this was the work of one dark sorcerer or a whole bunch of them. If it's a whole organization, taking them down is going to be a real pain. The Earl stood up and added that he was ready to wipe out anyone who got in his way. Looking at Ragmus, he added that he hoped the advisor would find all those responsible soon. Those who endangered his son and were up to no good on his land need to answer for what they've done. Joseph and Jaeger returned to the living room. It was already night outside. Looking at Vlad's friend, the Lord asked if his name was Goz, and the mercenary shouted loudly, "Yes!" The heir promised to discuss the reward tomorrow, and for now, the servants would show him to his bedroom. Joseph had a separate conversation planned with Vlad, without any witnesses. The Earl's younger son asked Vlad if he intended to pledge his sword to him in the future. Vlad looked the heir in the eye, and without a hint of doubt, he replied that he was ready to. Joseph had heard that the blonde wanted to carry out some kind of mission, which meant he had to be free. There was a contradiction in that. A free knight can't pledge his sword to anyone. The young master wanted to figure out the guy's mission, so he'd know how to structure the contract. The slum kid asked if the heir knew a knight named Godwin from Gator. Joseph was silent. He thought Vlad was a talented kid, but he never imagined the guy had such a crazy backstory. The one who wiped the smile off the Rose's face, that's Godwin, the knight from Gator. Vlad hadn't forgotten that he was the one who killed his savior, Jorge. The blonde admitted straight up that this knight messed up his whole world. He was the one the guy hated and admired at the same time. Joseph just listened. He honestly said he couldn't help with Godwin. It was way beyond him. Vlad said he knew all that. He totally understood that Joseph was just an earl's son. After hearing about the mission, the young master offered to make some changes to the contract. First thing the earl's son said, the contract's gonna be for 7 years. For those 7 years, Vlad gets fed, gets paid, and gets trained to become a top-tier knight. Becoming a real knight? A kid born in the slums wouldn't even dream of that. In return, the heir expects loyalty, and for Vlad to carry out his orders. The Godwin mission is the only exception. Also, the young master will answer any questions Vlad has about Swara. Joseph also added that Zamina, Vlad's friend, is alive and in a monastery. The earl's younger son finished up and waited for the young warrior's answer. After that conversation, Joseph talked with Jaeger. He believed the guy had a huge future. The knight wasn't completely sure about the decision. He thought he could find plenty of talented youths. But the heir was confident in his choice. Lots of talented kids out there, but not everyone can unlock their potential. The earl's youngest son was sure of his choice. He'd seen it for himself just the other day. Jaeger figured the kid was a wild card, gonna be a real pain to keep in line. That's exactly why Joseph wanted him to be the one to raise Vlad. 7 years, and the knight could mold him into something worthwhile, train him right. The loyal subject promised he'd give it his all, do his best. Looking out the window, the heir added that he'd initially seen Vlad as a useful tool, but now he realized This was a guy who'd always be reaching for something just out of grasp. Jaeger showed Vlad his personal room, and the kid thought it was crazy, luxurious, and huge. For someone who grew up in the slums, it was like a freaking palace. Jaeger explained that all the other recruits were from rich families, and they had a hard time adjusting here. Vlad was the only one who came from absolutely nothing. Before leaving, the knight added that he figured the kid wouldn't have any problems, unless he went looking for them. Vlad wanted to talk about the Rudiger thing, and the peanuts. The knight told him to forget about it, but Vlad was pissed. Jaeger beat him up even though he didn't eat the damn nuts. The guy left the room and reminded them that training would be twice a day, starting after lunch today. As he was leaving, he just froze, like he'd turned into a statue. There was this beautiful woman in the hallway. She greeted him and called him the most loyal knight. He whispered to Vlad that it was Lady Oksana, Joseph's mom, and they needed to show some respect. Jaeger bowed and greeted her. Vlad did the same, following his mentor's lead. She immediately noticed the unfamiliar young man. The knight explained to her that his young master had taken him in. Lady Oksana thanked him, saying she'd heard that he was the one who saved her son a few days ago. Vlad got a little flustered, and without looking up, he just said he was doing what he had to do. Joseph's mom promised she'd reward the kid for his special actions. She ruffled his light hair, saying the color really brought out his blue eyes. The woman noticed the guy had broad shoulders and that he'd be a real knockout when he filled out. Growing up in the slums, he wasn't used to talking to fancy ladies, so he was super embarrassed. Before leaving, Lady Oksana added that Jaeger was doing a great job. The knight was pretty surprised at how nervous and shy his new trainee was acting. Vlad reminded him that he came from the slums and hadn't exactly been hobnobbing with high society. All in all, not bad for a first-timer. Jaeger decided not to mention he got a little tongue-tied around Lady Oksana himself. He headed off to take care of stuff, telling his student to grab some grub before training. The dining hall was huge, but a bunch of local bullies immediately swarmed the new kid. The head jerk decided to test him, and straight up hocked a loogie into his soup. That was seriously messed up. People from high society shouldn't act like that. The punk gave a snide apology, saying he mistook the newbie for a garbage can because he smelled ripe. Vlad calmly fished the spit out of his soup and flicked it right back at him. Then he kept eating like nothing happened. He's a kid of the slums. He's seen worse. The cocky student didn't get what was up with the newbie. Why was he so chill? Vlad remembered Jaeger's instructions perfectly. He was Joseph's guest, and anything he did could damage the heir's reputation. The kid ate his tasty soup, thinking about how to get back at the jerk without letting his benefactor down. The punk and his goons backed off, but they were definitely waiting for another chance to humiliate the guy. Vlad turned around and asked his tormentor's name with a confident voice. The jerk got scared. The newbie's look was terrifying. His eyes shone like he could control his aura. Despite the awkward situation, the bully introduced himself anyway. His name was Sobanin. Vlad finished his lunch, got up from the table, and swore he'd remember the guy's name. While walking around the ancestral home, the Count noticed the recruits were training. He suggested to his trusted advisor that they watch the young warriors training for a bit. His sharp eye immediately spotted Vlad. This guy stood out from the crowd. The Count thought the kid had too much attitude. Ragmus asked his lord to look elsewhere. In the distance, someone was watching the newbie from behind cover. The Count's eagle eyes allowed him to recognize the knight. The observer was Jaeger. If Jaeger himself is watching Vlad's training, then it wouldn't hurt the Count to take a look too. The blonde started fighting with wooden swords against one of the bully's goons. This newbie's showing off some serious speed, dodging every attack like it's nothing. The guy noticed how aggressively the blonde was fighting, like it was a real brawl, not just practice. The Count was thinking that kind of style's way too reckless. But on the other hand, the kid's totally determined and using everything he learned in the books. In the fight, he remembered his mentor's words about how any fencing starts with your feet. You can scare the crap out of your opponent with the movement of your feet, your shoulders, even your eyes. This technique lets you control your opponent with just one move, and when the time is right, you can land that one final knockout blow. The guy ate that punch, went down on one knee, and was probably thinking Vlad totally played him. He thought the newbie was gonna dodge left, not come straight at him. The fight wasn't over. Vlad grabbed him by the hair and whispered that he was just Sobanin's little lapdog. He reminded the punk about how funny they were having it yesterday in the cafeteria with Sobanin and told him to laugh again. The next thing you know, he clocked the dude right in the face. The younger trainees stopped their drills. Everyone was watching in silence, too scared to step in. Ragmus told the count they couldn't let the students beat each other up during training, but the boss ordered them to stay out of it. This was exactly the kind of grit they needed to become knights. He even noticed that Jaeger seemed pretty happy with how the sparring match was going. The knight was watching his new students' every move. The instructor decided to step in because the training had turned into a straight-up beatdown. He was yelling at Vlad, demanding he stop right now. The guy was pissed that the kid was blowing off his orders. Vlad froze, then looked at the instructor and apologized. He got way too into the sparring match. That cold, aggressive stare was enough to scare even a seasoned instructor. Vlad turned around and left the training area without a word. Catching Sobanin's eye, he whispered that he tends to get carried away when he's really into something. Vlad preemptively apologized, hinting he might not be so forgiving during their next sparring session. He also added that he'd invite Sobanin over the next time he's having soup. The arrogant jerk was rattled. His bravado vanished quick. For a second, it seemed like Mr. Joseph had brought in some kind of wild animal off the streets. At lunch, Goes asked about the sparring incident. Gossip travels fast among the staff. Vlad didn't want to talk about it, so he changed the subject and asked his friend if he liked working at the stables. Of course, the former mercenary was super happy. I mean, these were the Baysid family stables. His buddy still wanted to talk about how Vlad had taken care of all those high society jerks who messed with him. The blonde calmly replied that he grew up in the slums, and that kind of thing was normal for him. Goes was shocked by his friend's coldness. Vlad added that he didn't start anything, but they were the ones who came at him first. The friend's conversation was interrupted by a chubby kid named Potri Kanor. Vlad asked what the stranger wanted from him and Goza. Potri got flustered and didn't know how to answer. The blonde told him he could either sit down or leave them to eat in peace. Potri quickly sat down and started thanking them for the invitation. Ever since he got here, the guy had been eating alone, usually in the bathroom. Vlad told him not to spoil his appetite. He was looking forward to enjoying that awesome sausage. The big guy grinned. His dad supplied the meat and other cured stuff to this place. He even offered to take Vlad's sausage, saying he couldn't even look at it anymore. The slum kid got suspicious. Did Potri really think Vlad could be bought off with food? After lunch, the guy took his friends to his room and showed off the huge stash his dad sent him. All the new recruits from noble families didn't consider the big guy their equal. That's exactly why he wanted to be friends with Vlad. Extra connections never hurt. The blonde smiled and suggested they eat lunch together every day. Goetze was drooling, thinking he was in heaven, looking at the abundance of sausages and frankfurters. Potri found it hard to believe that someone would agree to sit at the same table with him. Jaeger was thinking about relaxing after Kaida and Maxim arrived. Taking care of Yosef and training Vlad was a real pain in the butt. His thoughts were cut off by a guy who greeted him way too loud. He was dying to know where Jaeger was rushing off to. Jaeger greeted the knight, Gregory, already regretting taking this hallway. Gregory thought his brother-in-arms was being way too obvious about his annoyance. Jaeger just mumbled he was in a hurry. Sir Gregory wasn't surprised. I mean, running all the errands yourself must be a real drag. The guy complimented Jaeger, then said he thought he'd be a pretty good mentor. The man with the eye patch didn't get why Gregory was bringing up the subject of vassals. Gregory shared his experience training Potri. Things were going well, but he couldn't get the kid to lose weight. Then he switched gears to Vlad, praising the newbie, saying he really liked the guy. Jaeger cut off the praise fest and told him to get to the point. The guy reminded me he doesn't usually get involved in student stuff, but Vlad seems like a decent dude. The knight knew Vlad didn't have any friends. He's a total loner, but Gregory really wanted him to pal around with Potri. Turns out he's a distant relative of Gregory's, and the knight couldn't stand seeing him get picked on all the time. All Jaeger cared about was what he'd get out of it. The brother-in-arms swore he'd return the favor, anything Jaeger needed. The guy sighed. Vlad wasn't exactly the easiest guy to deal with. Gregory figured the blondie had huge potential, but his mentor just threw up his hands. Vlad had a problem. He just couldn't stay on a horse. Goes explained that all the horses here are specially trained and aren't afraid of people. But as soon as Vlad gets near them, they freak out. It wasn't a skill issue. The other stable hands thought so too. Vlad knew this problem had been dogging him since he was a kid. Animals just went nuts whenever the blonde dude walked by. But that fateful night, he and Goza were riding Jaeger's horse. Goz wondered, Jaeger's got a high-end horse. Maybe Vlad can only ride top-of-the-line steeds. But how to break it to the master? The teacher insisted Vlad learn to ride ASAP. The servant girl interrupted their chat in the stables. She said Lady Oksana needed to see Vlad, like right now. This was super weird news for the young warrior. Why would a noble lady want him? Looking at the young blonde, the woman said she couldn't believe a guy like him grew up in the slums. Vlad was afraid to breathe, and Joseph's mom mentioned the new outfit really suited him. She told the tailor to make the next outfit a little looser, since the kid's only 17 and still growing. When summer rolls around, she'll get Vlad another set of clothes. The embarrassed kid bowed low and thanked her. The woman replied that he saved her son's life, so she should be thanking him. Oksana apologized for pulling him away from his training and told him to get back to it. Stepping out of her room, Vlad sighed. For some reason, talking to her was tough. The new clothes were so nice and comfortable, they felt like they belonged to someone else. Ever since he joined the Bayezid family, he'd been trying his best, but he still felt like an outsider. Looking out the window, he noticed a scuffle going down in the courtyard. Sobanin and his goons were beating the crap out of someone on the ground. The bully kept saying the guy was getting soft, 'cause they hadn't messed with him in a couple days. Poor Potri was on the ground, trying to cover his head with his hands. That arrogant student really didn't like that he'd managed to connect with Vlad. The blonde watched it all go down, thinking there's always two kinds of people, those who have everything and those who have nothing. In the end, Sobanin's just another lowlife who only picks on people who can't fight back. Vlad grabbed his old clothes, figuring it'd be better to wear those than his new outfit today. Late that night, he knocked on Potri's door, and when asked who it was, quietly answered that it was Vlad. The poor guy opened the door, his whole face swollen and bruised. The blonde immediately said he needed something from his buddy. He pointed to the wall covered in meat products and added that he'd be taking that. That was some seriously expensive ham, the kind Potri was saving for a special occasion. He wasn't expecting Vlad to see him as a friend, but he sure as hell didn't expect this kind of treatment either. Looked like the guy was just like everyone else, seeing the fat guy as someone he could take advantage of. Whatever. It was still better than being alone, so Potri gave his buddy the ham. Taking the meat, the slum kid told him not to think it was free, he was just taking what he deserved. The beaten-up fat guy couldn't figure out what he owed his blue-eyed pal. The kid explained that a powerful knight had taught him this principle. A knight should only ever take the reward they've rightfully earned. Sobanin has gathered 14 students against Vlad. Might not even be enough. That punk threatened the blonde and told him to shut his mouth. Soon he'll be begging for mercy. Vlad crooked a finger at him. He came for these guys and wants to wrap things up fast. The jerk gave his goons the signal to jump the kid all at once. Right then, Vlad was thinking it was a good thing he changed clothes beforehand. There's going to be a lot of pain dished out tonight, but these lowlifes brought it on themselves. The first guy who rushed Vlad got his butt kicked real quick. The boss man barked orders at his loyal dogs, but the blonde was holding them off solo like it was nothing. The jerk was stunned. The kid's fighting style was totally different from their sparring matches. He screamed at his goons not to back down, threatening to make an example of anyone who ran. But a few seconds later, Vlad easily got to him too. He glared at the jerk, who dared to threaten death. But had he ever actually taken a life? The arrogant jerk wound up his wooden sword for a massive swing at the kid. But Vlad dodged the attack like it was nothing. Like he was fighting some drunk, not a knight in training. During the trek, the guy kept practicing his solo strikes. Even the voice in his head admitted that training with Jaeger was paying off big time. Now he was starting to grasp his gap, the space he controlled in a fight, his own flow, the thing that let him hit his opponent without resistance. One clean shot, and Sobanin was down on the floor like a sack of garbage. Vlad raised his wooden sword high above his opponent's face, ready to strike. The punk was bawling like a baby. He knew he was done for. Vlad brought the sword down on his opponent with earth-shattering force. Sobanin let out a blood-curdling scream, totally expecting this after beating down that fatso. His loyal goons froze in their tracks, scared stiff and not knowing what to do. Vlad jammed his wooden sword into the ground, barely an inch from Sobanin's head. He warned the guy never to even look at him or Potri again. The dude who was running his mouth just minutes ago couldn't even squeak out a word. It finally hit him that Vlad could have easily ended him right there. Job done, the guy figured he'd more than paid back that ham his buddy gave him. Glancing at the other students, he asked who was next, since they needed to finish what they started. They all gripped their swords tight, but were too scared to even twitch. Vlad warned them that if they just stood there, he'd come to them. You could hear the trainees screaming from hundreds of yards away. Head of the Bayezid family watched it all go down, but didn't step in. He was impressed. A few days after that night, they held the monthly night council meeting. It was a coincidence, but it turned out that one side of the room was a column of knights backing Rudiger, and on the other side were those who supported the Earl's younger son, Joseph. Gregory preferred to stay neutral and keep out of it. All the orders were read out by the captain of the Knight Order, Anatolas. Time to hand out the holy relics that the church sent over. The Earl could definitely feel that the atmosphere in the hall was totally different today. The older son's supporters looked seriously pissed. Seemed like they were ready to throw down right then and there. The guys who were backing Joseph seemed chill, even happy about something. The head of the family was stoked because Jaeger and the other knights had been down in the dumps for too long. After the meeting wrapped up, Anatolas told all the knights to get back to their duties. One of the older son's supporters threw a nasty jab at Jaeger, saying he'd brought a rabid dog into the mix. The guy didn't say anything, but he turned and gave the loudmouth a real death stare. One of his buddies told him not to start anything with Jaeger. Gregory was in a great mood. It looked like the knights were about to blow a gasket. Jaeger was clueless, but his buddy cut him off, saying the knight was just being modest. A couple nights ago, Vlad really cleaned house and straightened out those cocky students. Jaeger just figured his battle buddy was a pain in the butt. Gregory thanked the knight and promised he'd fulfill his promise at a moment's notice. Jaeger said he'd remember this day, and then, after saying goodbye, quickly walked away from Gregory. Truth be told, he was proud of Vlad, though it was to be expected, seeing as he was the guy's teacher. Joseph showed off the new armor his father had sent as a gift for Vlad. That kind of gift was way too expensive for a regular vassal. Jaeger looked at the new battlesuit, and then pointed out that it was made from the hide of a gray war orc. Those monsters only live up north, so you can tell just by the clothes that the guy's a northern warrior. Joseph totally understood that Vlad had made a good impression on the Earl. The guy got a lavish gift like that in just a month. Jaeger replied that there wasn't anyone among the vassals who could compete with the former street kid right now. Joseph pulled out a letter with the family crest and told his loyal subjects that they couldn't just sit on their hands. It's time for them to tackle a new mission, one that's going to be tougher than the last. Jaeger skimmed the letter and realized this offer was seriously complicated. All the heir cared about was whether his loyal knight could handle it. The man replied coldly that he would definitely accept the offer. The Earl's younger son was satisfied. If Jaeger was in, it was a done deal. Tomorrow, they're heading to Daimar to do a favor and get a sweet reward for it. Lord Joseph and his entourage set off on their long journey. As they rode in the carriage, the heir told Vlad that Daymar was famous for its lemons. Also, the place was a gateway to the central region, which is super important for us northerners. Vlad wondered if Jaeger had agreed to participate. Joseph replied that this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. The Heinel family's inheritance feud was in full swing. Their invitation was basically a desperate plea. The blonde guy sighed, thinking noble life was nothing but complications. Bottom line, it was a land grab between blood relatives. The heir added that family feuds were an old noble tradition. Alicia's the rightful heir to the Heinel lands, but she can't inherit them peacefully. Her uncle's gunning for the family throne, so he's calling her illegitimate. A trial by combat is the only way to settle this mess. Going by the family tree, Joseph was Alicia's 8th cousin, but that's close enough to lend a hand. This situation would put the Heinels in their debt, and the Count was all for it. Jaeger was one of the knights invited to defend the Heinel family's honor. He caught Vlad staring. He hated that insolent look from a vassal. It pissed him off that a low-level vassal rode in a carriage while his teacher had to ride a horse. Vlad totally got it, but he had no excuse. After that kid took care of the other students, Jaeger could finally hold his head high, but now his squire can't even ride a horse? What a joke. The knight couldn't believe he got stuck with a defective student. The kid probably thinks he could ride a fancier horse. Of the two of them, only Jaeger has the right to ride a fancy horse. He's a knight. Vlad's just a vassal. The blonde noticed his heart had been racing like crazy the last couple of days. Not that it was a surprise. He'd been through a lot lately. Across from him in the carriage sat a young master who wouldn't shut up. Jaeger rode alongside, absolutely furious with his student. A terrifying rumble cut through the young warrior's thoughts, and the ground started shaking. Vordan figured it was an earthquake, even though they're rare in these parts. Jaeger ordered everyone to stop and dismount. Vlad kicked open the carriage door, totally confused about what was going on. He hauled Master Joseph out and told him to keep his head down. The heir whispered that Vlad's concern was touching, but he didn't need to get so worked up. The shaking stopped, and Vordan told the other knights to get back on their horses. Vlad told his master it was the first time he'd ever seen an earthquake. Joseph said it was something else entirely, pointing to a weird trail in the field. It looked like the earth had been plowed from underneath for miles. The culprit was a giant grave worm, the remains of a fallen dragon. Daymar, a beautiful and cozy city, the capital of the Heinel family's holdings. Upon arrival, Joseph explained that today, Vlad could be free. The master added that the vassal could feel free to take a stroll around the estate. It was very strange and unusual. He was entrusted with complete freedom. The heir could tell from Vlad's face that he doubted something. The squire didn't understand why he was there. A team duel, a rare and honorable event, a chance that not everyone gets to see. Vlad will have to observe the knights and learn a lesson for himself. Joseph rightly noted that it's better to see something once than to hear about it 100 times. Jaeger asked him to be careful. Heaven forbid Vlad gets roughed up in some back alley. There's another training session tonight. The blonde turned to his mentor like, did he really think his student was that dense? The knight, all thunder in his voice, explained he'd lost faith in the kid, seeing as he couldn't even get on a horse. If Vlad spots anything hinky, he's gotta report it ASAP, got it? Left alone with the voice in his head, Vlad suggested they take a stroll around the neighborhood. This estate was smaller than the Bayezid family's place and looked kinda run down too. All of a sudden, the sword at his hip started buzzing like crazy. The voice had this weird feeling, like it had been here before, you know? It clearly remembered that lone tree on the hill next to the estate. Vlad figured he needed a quiet place to pray again, for the first time in ages. They had a deal. The voice gives him the sword, and the kid helps him recover his memories. All this time, the kid's just been taking. Now it's time to give something back. Alicia thanked Joseph Bayezid for answering the call for help and coming all this way. He replied that he couldn't have done otherwise. Blood ties are a powerful thing. The heir informed her that the Count had already settled everything, and now everyone was waiting for Lady Alicia's decision. The girl clenched her hands tightly. She had thought about it for a long time, and now believes that everything should be as the Count wants. But that will only happen if she wins the duel. The heir looked her in the eyes and firmly stated that she had nothing to worry about. The Bayezid family sword always brings victory, without exception. After the reception, the younger son said that they shouldn't underestimate her. The situation is risky, but the lady is holding it together. Despite all that, Joseph reminded him that their plan remains the same. The only thing that fades with time is our memories. That's exactly why people are so obsessed with leaving their mark. Looking at the traces they leave behind, like scars, they can relive the old days over and over. Vlad stared at the headstone and thought it would be great to do something like this for his mom. He leaned over the grave, covered in leaves from the tree, and figured nobody had cleaned it in a while. He brushed the leaves and other crap off the headstone with his hand. Pulling out his sword, he told his mysterious friend to watch as much as he wanted. The guy got into his usual prayer stance and stuck the sword in the ground. His unusual companion was looking around the place, like it was triggering some lost memories. In his long-forgotten past, this tree seemed much smaller. He had a feeling he'd been here with someone before. He whispered to Vlad that the person standing in front of them recognized him, which freaked Vlad out since they were alone. The voice asked if he could borrow the kid's body to get a good look at things. Vlad slowly closed his eyes and told his buddy to go for it. A second later, the voice in his head took over, and the guy's right eye snapped open, glowing bright blue. Standing right in front of him was a massive white snake, bigger than anything Vlad had ever seen. The voice in his head was super chill, explaining to his friend that it was a spirit. The young warrior thought to himself that he'd been seeing way too much crazy stuff lately. It was a weird feeling, like the spirit was staring right at Vlad's mysterious teacher, seeing him through the guy's body. The huge snake slithered down from the tree and started slowly creeping towards the young vassal. The voice kept saying the spirit wouldn't attack, but the kid had no clue why his buddy was so sure. The spirit was giving off this intense, awesome vibe, but it didn't feel hostile at all. This snake gave off this weird vibe, like a warm, good feeling, almost like a spring breeze coming down from a high hill out of nowhere. Some dude's voice from behind interrupted the ceremony, and they asked Vlad who the hell he was. There was this girl behind him, and she wanted to know how he got there and what he was doing. This place is supposed to be off limits to everyone except the Heinel family. Vlad sheathed his sword and apologized, said he was just looking for a quiet place to pray. The young woman was super surprised, like, was this stranger really here praying? The guy flashed his ID and added that he wasn't just some random dude. He was Squire Yeager's right-hand man. She took a look at the ID, still kinda suspicious, but chilled out a little. Guess this blondie's okay. The vassal was thinking he shouldn't be standing at a noble's grave. If Joseph found out, he'd be letting the heir down big time, and Yeager would definitely make this guy's life a living nightmare. Vlad, being a gentleman, approached the stranger and asked if she needed a hand. She's just the cleaning lady here to tidy up, and he figured he could help her out. He'd already cleared all the fallen leaves off the headstone. The guy figured it was a way to show some respect to the people resting here. Vlad took the bucket from the girl and said he'd take over the cleaning for now. But in return, he asked her to keep this meeting a secret, to avoid any unnecessary chatter. He honestly admitted that if Yeager found out about this, he'd be in deep trouble. The girl replied that she wanted to see how well he did with the work first. Vlad thought to himself that pretty girls always make things complicated. He kept quiet and diligently scrubbed the headstone and the grave marker. She was watching Vlad, barely holding back a smile. A few hours later, the kid was watching the knight's train. It was totally captivating and mind-blowing. He'd never seen anything like it. The unseen companion's voice pointed out how strong they were, especially Sir Colin. If that second knight's attacks were landing, he could easily shatter his opponent's bones. The mustached knight was seriously strong. That's why they called him Wartface of the Central Region. But still, Sir Pablo was more impressive. His defensive technique is insane. He can deflect any attack. Vlad had no idea warm-ups were this intense. Was he supposed to get this strong just to become a knight? The voice reminded him that Sir Vordan was a knight too, but he wasn't exactly known for his strength. Vlad started to realize, with a sinking feeling, where he stood in this massive world. Becoming a knight was going to be one hell of a long, hard road for him. The day of the duel was finally here. Jaeger told his squire to tighten up his armor a little more. Vlad spotted Andre Heinel, the guy trying to steal his niece's power. Jaeger told him to pay close attention to the fight. It wasn't something Vlad would see every day. Jaeger also mentioned he didn't know exactly what went down yesterday, but Vlad shouldn't sweat it. Vlad was surprised the knight knew about yesterday's incident. The kid was seriously nervous. The knights he'd seen before were crazy strong. Jaeger quietly told him, "A kid's gotta start small. You can't just start running. The bigger your goals, the longer the journey to get there. That's just how it works." The doors to the hall swung open. Vlad had heard the heir was young, but he hadn't seen him in 2 days. The kid held his breath, cold sweat beading on his face. Alicia Hainel, the heir to the throne, was the girl he'd mistaken for a servant yesterday. A voice in his head pointed out that Vlad could add another charge to his rap sheet: insulting nobility. Alicia walked past all the knights and Vlad. She slowed down as she passed him and looked him in the eye. The young man bowed as etiquette demanded. He could tell from her eyes that she recognized him. The priest announced the start of the duel. With everyone gathered in the hall, God would watch over the knights. The duel, with so much riding on it, had begun. This was a prestigious but brutal duel, featuring some of the best knights from the north and central regions. The blood of a noble is pale and blue, unlike the scarlet blood of a commoner. It's filled with responsibility and duty. But Alicia wasn't about to pretend she was some blue blood snob, so she tossed in the towel. The lady called off the first duel. She just couldn't watch anymore. The knight fighting for her couldn't even hold his sword. His face was covered in blood. He didn't want to give up and thought the fight wasn't over. The priest spoke to Sir Duncan. His lordship threw the white flag. The duel's over. Duncan's opponent said it was a great fight, showing respect to the old master. The tired old man was glad that the student who beat him still saw him as his master. He raised a warrior to protect the Hainel family, but the knight became the sword that's destroying it. The priest loudly announced that the winner of the first duel was Sir Kiar, representing Lord Andre. Alicia's uncle was very pleased with this start. Stepping into the center of the arena, we have our duelists, Jaeger, and the massive knight everyone calls Wardy. The priest, watching them, reminded everyone that using aura is forbidden. If anyone gets seriously hurt, the fight's over. Jaeger slowly turned around and saw Vlad standing behind him. He pointed to his one good eye, signaling him to watch and learn. He drew his weapon, ready to give today's lesson right here. And the subject of this lesson is that giant oaf pretending to be a knight. Wardy wanted to end this quick. His attacks were wild, but Jaeger kept dodging. The big guy thought he was only missing by a hair, so he figured he could still win. He put even more power into each swing, but no matter how hard he tried, Jaeger just found him way too slow. The eye-patch knight was toying with his opponent like a cat with a mouse. Andre was stoked. He figured his knight's next hit would land, and victory would be theirs. Only Sir Pablo looked bummed. He alone saw that this was the beginning of the end for Wartface. The big guy started to freak out, totally pissed that he couldn't land a hit. Jaeger was straight up mocking him, like a circus trainer bossing around an animal. That just made Wartface even angrier, and made him miss again and again. Vlad's mysterious teacher told the kid to watch closely. Jaeger was about to show him something. Throughout the whole fight, Jaeger had been baiting his opponent into missing over and over. Knights call that parrying, but it's not easy to master. Parrying. What lets you easily block an attack and turn it to your advantage? Finally, Warthog went down on his knees, totally gassed, unable to even hold his sword anymore. Looking up at Jaeger, he couldn't believe he hadn't landed a single hit. He seemed like a massive wall, just impossible to get past. Then he dropped his gaze to the floor and whispered that he was giving up. The heiress let out a calm breath when she heard the priest announce Jaeger, the knight representing Lady Alicia, as the winner of the second duel. Unsurprisingly, her uncle wasn't exactly thrilled with how things turned out. After the duel, Jaeger approached Vlad and asked if he'd learned anything. The squire replied that he remembered everything and thanked his teacher for the lesson. It was time for the final duel, the one that would decide who would inherit the Heinel family lands. The tall, fair-haired knight representing Alicia's uncle announced his name, Pablo of Arnstein. His opponent replied that there was no point in introductions since they'd already met. Uber of Shayat stood confidently, looking like a seasoned knight. A voice in his head noted that Pablo was a good fighter, but Uber was in a completely different league. Suddenly, Uber looked at Lady Alicia and gave a deep bow. Joseph couldn't believe his eyes. Why was the knight giving up before the duel even started? Uber of the Shayat family publicly refused to participate in the duel. Lady Alicia was stunned by such a disgraceful act. Uncle was pleased, since in this case, the duel was considered forfeited. The Earl's heir realized that the treacherous Andre had bribed the knight beforehand. He demanded that everyone present swear to God to serve him faithfully. But Joseph objected, because the fight wasn't over yet. Andre Heinel understood the concern, but Lady Alicia's knight bailed on the duel, so that's his win. The Earl's heir replied that the duel ain't over till he gets a result he's happy with. The Bayezid family never takes L for an answer. One of Alicia's uncle's entourage suggested hearing the heir out, seeing as he's a rep from the north. If things go south, she'll be the reason for a beef between the north and the center. Uncle was willing to hear the Earl's youngest son's proposal. Joseph asked for permission to continue the duel. He couldn't let Lady Alicia's rep get trashed like that. Andre was cool with it, but Joseph didn't have a knight to replace Sir Hubert after he choked. The rules said guests couldn't roll in with a whole army of knights, but Joseph, with a confident voice, replied that he did have a knight. Pointing to the blonde guy, he added that he was presenting the mighty knight Vlad from Sawara. Andre was furious. A squire isn't a knight and can't fight in a duel. Joseph reminded him of the rules. Any sword wielder can participate in an honor duel. The man shouted loudly that sending a vassal to duel a knight was disrespectful. Joseph raised his voice too, asking if Andre had thought about honor when he bribed a knight. He was trying to cheat the Bayezid family using underhanded tricks. Joseph added that he vouched for Vlad completely. Andre calmed down, saying if the heir wanted a duel that badly, he wouldn't object. Jaeger tightened the squire's armor. Vlad was in shock, wondering if he was really going to fight a real knight. The blonde calmly asked if he'd survive this fight. Jaeger replied that if things got really bad, he'd step in himself. Joseph moved closer to his vassal. He gave the young warrior a tight hug, catching the slum kid completely off guard. Vlad felt awkward. He didn't think his lord should have to do that. The Earl's younger son whispered in his ear that he just needed to hold out for 10 minutes. He had a plan from the start. Vordan got his orders, but they needed to buy some time. Just 10 minutes. The fate of a lot of people depends on it. Vlad promised he'd give it everything he had. The guy stepped into the center of the room and bowed to Lady Alicia, as etiquette demanded. Facing him was a seasoned opponent with a massive shield. The blonde gripped his sword and announced loudly that he was Vlad from Sawara. The knight tossed his shield to the ground, saying a vassal wasn't worthy to hear his name. The duel was pointless after a mere squire showed up. Honor. A word Vlad hated more than anything. People always seemed to glorify the pretty and shiny stuff. Maybe he came from the slums, but he had no intention of ending up as a nobody. He stared at his opponent and asked what made the knight so different from him. His rival grabbed his sword and told the vassal to forget the rules. He wanted to see what the squire could really do. Vlad didn't hesitate. He charged at the knight like a wild wolf going after its prey. Their swords clashed. The kid stared the man right in the eyes, without a trace of fear. Today, everything would change, because for the first time, the young man raised his sword not for himself, but to defend the honor of others. The voice in my head told me to aim left. That's the side the knight's trying to protect. Andre watched the fight. He didn't expect the vassal to be so damn fast. Even he could see the kid had this raw, primal ferocity that was kinda scary, like a starving wolf on the hunt. The knight looked at the kid and whispered that he had a strong spirit, but he hasn't had time to really develop it yet. Vlad tried to block the blows. It felt like he was getting pounded with rocks. Vlad tried to weather those heavy hits and hold on to his sword. The voice in his head told him not to block them head on, better to try and dodge. The knight's next hit landed on his guard, but it was crazy powerful. Vlad went flying across the room, slamming back first into the wall. His opponent was impressed. The kid was weak, but putting up a hell of a fight. He raised his sword, adding that it was a damn shame to meet such a talented guy like this. The voice in Vlad's head calmly said the kid had done a great job. Suddenly, the knight froze. He saw a parry, something the squire had learned just half an hour ago from his mentor, Jaeger. Everyone was in shock that a simple vassal had stopped the knight's sword. Andre refused to believe his eyes. He figured it was a fluke. Vlad was so exhausted he couldn't even lift his sword anymore. But the experienced knight knew it wasn't a coincidence. Even he had a hard time believing it. The squire looked up at the knight and asked him why. He wanted to know why it always had to be him. Pablo frowned, wondering if his vassal had lost his mind in battle. The knight quickly realized the kid wasn't crazy. He was remembering something. He was a nobody without any rights, but he dreamed of the good life. Since he was a kid, he dreamed of abilities and opportunities that could change everything. Vlad dreamed of getting the rights he never had since the day he was born, and then heading off to some amazing place to change his life forever. Looking at Pablo, he croaked out that he wanted to be there too. The seasoned knight sensed that a flower was about to bloom, a brand new shining flower, the likes of which no one's ever seen before. Their swords clashed again. The duel raged on. Andre couldn't figure out what was happening. The vassal should have lost ages ago. Vlad's palms were bloody, but he kept gripping his sword. The vassal wasn't giving up. Jaeger watched in surprise. He showed that parry not to be used, but so his student would grasp the basics. But the talented kid was able to use it right away, in his very first fight. Pablo noticed the sharpness at the tip of the sword was gone. Now, the weapon felt like pure resolve. He was even curious what the young squire was so determined about. Suddenly, Pablo felt it. The kid's sword started to howl. The knight knew what was coming. The kid was about to bloom. If he's got this right, he's got to see it through. Before his next strike, he even warned the kid to block it, then dodge. He looked at his vassal and told him a new world was about to bloom. The blonde sword started crackling with energy. Jaeger saw it all. He knew his gut feeling was dead on. Pablo yelled at his assistants to hurry up and bring him his shield. Getting into a defensive stance, he announced himself loud and clear, Pablo of Arnstein. Now he wanted the kid, hungry for recognition, to introduce himself in return. Vlad, a kid born with nothing, but fighting tooth and nail for his rights. The one who'll finally stand up for what's right and get what he deserves. He roared his name, Vlad of Suara, his body glowing with a blue aura. A blinding light filled the entire hall. Even Lady Alicia had to shield her eyes. Pablo unleashed his aura too, and it was the color of gold. He loudly commanded the youth to keep fighting, now seeing his vassal as an equal. Shrouded in his own aura, Vlad leaped high with his sword, ready to unleash everything. A flash of light, and moments later, the young man was sprawled on the floor. Pablo sat beside him, telling the squire he'd done a fantastic job. Andre started yelling that it was the aura. He saw it with his own eyes. Using an aura was forbidden in the duel. Those were the agreed-upon rules. Pablo was furious at that greedy jerk. They just witnessed the first bloom of a magnificent flower, and all Andre could think about was the payoff. Joseph thanked Sir Pablo for fulfilling his knightly duty. The knight bowed, saying he did what he had to. The duel was an honor. Then, The Earl's heir asked the Holy Father if the glow everyone saw was an aura. The priest was certain. They had just witnessed the awakening of an aura. The young lord wanted to know what was superior, the divine rules of the duel or the code of the sword. Swordmaster, an honorable title that only one person in history has ever held. Joseph reminded everyone that the code of the sword is both honor and duty, and it's also tied to the crown. The young lord turned to Andre, asking if anyone could say what's higher, honor or duty. The Earl's younger son added that they should report this to the royal court and the Holy See, and until they get an answer, the duel's outcome is on hold. All young and delicate flowers deserve to bloom. Opportunity is a beautiful thing. That's exactly why knights are sworn to protect these precious moments, no matter what. Everyone who's ever wielded a noble blade has had to swear an oath in its name. It was the first law of the Swordmaster and Frausen, the founding king. Vlad finally woke up and asked Goze to pour him some water. He whispered that every single bone in his body ached. Opening his eyes to grab the water, Vlad almost jumped out of bed. It was Lord Joseph, and he said with a smile that he was really glad Vlad had finally come to. The vassal got out of bed and apologized for his impudence, but the Earl's youngest son told him not to stress or worry about anything. He handed the brave young man the water and asked where exactly it hurt, but Vlad just whispered that he was already feeling better. Joseph thanked the guy from the bottom of his heart. He never thought things would go this far. It was all thanks to Vlad that the duel got postponed indefinitely. The situation was complicated, because the rules of the blessed duel and the sword code got all tangled up. Vlad remembered that the voice in his head had mentioned the code at some point. Everyone who wants to become a knight has to swear the oath of the sword code. Joseph was sure that the time would come when Vlad would swear the oath too. The heir got up from the chair and told the kid to get his strength back. They couldn't stick around here for long. The blonde tried to explain that he was fine and ready to head back, like today. But Joseph said he wouldn't let him hit the road until Vlad was fully recovered. Uncle Andre left the party earlier than everyone else. The loyal knight told Lady Alicia that he'd asked the church for protection, just in case. The girl found it hard to believe she was letting those who wanted to take her down get away so easily. The knight figured there'd be time for revenge later. Right now, they needed to get Dimar under control. The lady asked how the lemon harvest was going, and the old guy said it wasn't looking good. She was puzzled. The lemon yield was down. Maybe they should switch to barley. But the loyal knight suggested holding off a bit. A sudden change in production wouldn't do them any favors. Lady Alicia calmed down a little. Now wasn't the time to make rash decisions. Looking out the window, she asked if knights knew how to ride horses. Sir Duncan didn't get the weird question. He explained that a knight wouldn't dare call himself one if he couldn't ride. It's as important as knowing how to use a sword. Alicia smiled. Looks like the gods don't give people everything they want. Meanwhile, Jaeger was trying to teach the vassal how to ride. But the attempt failed. The horse quickly threw Vlad on his butt. The mentor quietly asked whether it wasn't Vlad who had said he could handle the expensive horse. The boy timidly murmured that perhaps the horse needed to be even more expensive than this one. He gave his apprentice a hefty cuff on the back of the head and ordered him to think before speaking next time. The young man held the back of his head. The last time he had ridden her, though Goza had been the one controlling her. Joseph's groom confirmed this information. All of it had happened during the conquest. The knight remained silent. He understood the situation was bad. He felt that everything would change once he personally began teaching the young man to ride. It was unclear what the problem was. Even Jaeger's horse resisted Vlad. It seemed the animal saw something in the boy and was very afraid of him. The mentor added that that was enough for today. The young man asked whether they would continue tomorrow. Jaeger looked at the boy and added that the riding lessons should be postponed for a while. Once Jaeger gets back to Sutruma, he's definitely going to scheme something up, but for now, he's got other fish to fry. After the knight left, Goz said it was like the horses hated the guy more and more each time. Vlad was worried he wouldn't be able to handle the pricier horses, but his buddy cheered him up and suggested maybe a cow. The squire got his feelings hurt by that and told his friend to think before he speaks. Goes snidely added that he should just keep riding in a carriage. Jaeger would appreciate it. The voice in his head figured the problem was how fast Vlad moves. Horses are sensitive to that kind of thing. The mysterious mentor recommended learning to control his momentum. The voice was sure that since Vlad had mastered his aura, he could learn this too. But he shouldn't forget Jaeger's words. Don't run before you can walk. Everyone was planning to head back to Sutruma tomorrow, and Vlad figured he should visit the grave one more time. The trader walked down the hall, thinking about how he'd botched the mission, hoping the Lord would understand. At the end of the day, what happened was more like a freak accident. The more he thought about it, the funnier it got, because it was just some regular lackey. Hubert's thoughts were cut short by Jaeger's sword, its cold steel touching the trader's throat. The sellout knight calmly said that Jaeger didn't have to go this far, but the knight with the eye patch was sure it had to be done this way. Hubert was surprised. Had he been waiting for this moment for so long, and now he's out of time? In the trader's opinion, all this was a waste of time on his only day off. But the knight wanted to wrap things up while he had his long-awaited day off. Hubert calmly replied that he understood, but he didn't have a choice. He flared his aura and said they had one job, and Jaeger better understand that. Hubert figured this one-eyed knight was the kind of warrior who'd bark if his master told him to. He eased the blade away from his neck a bit and said that warning should be enough. People call him swordsman, but that ain't right. Guys like Jaeger are just dogs that can't bite unless they're told to. Hubert added that if the knight was done yapping, he should scram. Anything else would be a declaration of war. But the trader didn't get to finish. The knight clocked the lowlife right in the face. Hubert didn't see that coming and went flying a few yards. Vlad's mentor replied that his lord was a good man and wouldn't mind a little nip. Hubert clutched his face, quietly asking if that was enough to calm Jaeger down. A split second after the question, the knight's fist landed square in the trader's gut. He dropped to his knees, gasping for air after that. The knight figured they were in the same line of work, so the trader would definitely understand him. Uber replied with a sour tone that it was more than enough. The knight left by sharing his hope to meet Uber again so he could pay for everything he'd done. Sooner or later, they'd definitely cross paths. The empire was falling apart. It was a time when people couldn't just band together anymore. Jaeger totally understood what the other guy meant. That time was coming, no doubt. A terrible, bloody time, when a sword is the only thing that matters. Vlad climbed the hill to try and find the serpent again. The blonde wanted to get started ASAP so he wouldn't run into Lady Alicia again like last time. By handing over control of his body to his mysterious mentor, he opened his eye and immediately saw the spirit. The serpent seemed to be waiting for his old friend to return to this place. The young man asked his mentor if the spirit was a friend. The voice whispered, maybe. The serpent suddenly began coiling around the guy, hoping it was a friendly gesture. The voice in his head told Vlad not to try to understand the spirit. Humans just can't grasp it. Everything around them began to shine with a bright, blue, aura-like light. The street kid felt warmth emanating from the spirit. It was magnificent. The mysterious voice accompanying the young man was pleased. He hadn't expected to witness a long-forgotten wonder. What they were seeing right now was called the spirit bloom. Lady Alicia regretted having to see her dear guests off in such a way. She would have liked to throw a huge banquet. Joseph said that their intentions were enough. It was time to fix all the disagreements in the Heinel family. The girl graciously thanked Joseph for everything he'd personally done for her. The Earl's heir bowed and added that it was time for them to be on their way. Sir Duncan asked them to hold on a minute and ordered Vlad to come forward. The SLUM kid was really surprised, wondering if he'd screwed up again. Joseph looked at the vassal and repeated Duncan's request. Jaeger figured they must have prepared some kind of award ceremony. The old knight ordered Vlad to kneel before Lady Alicia. She loudly declared that she was grateful to Vlad from Sawara. If it weren't for him, she wouldn't be standing here. He defended her honor and exposed the cheating that tainted the duel. No amount of gratitude could ever repay that. The girl pulled out an expensive handkerchief with the family crest and offered it to him. Even though he's not a knight yet, she'd trust her name to a stand-up guy like him. Joseph watched silently, knowing Lady Alicia had made a smart move. She wanted to solidify her connection to Bayezid by backing promising guys like Vlad. Vlad stared at the handkerchief, unsure what to do. Just accept it? He remembered Jaeger explaining that, "You gotta take what a noble offers. It's just how things are." He'd turned down some peanuts offered by the Earl's oldest son and caught hell from the instructor for it. He didn't want another beatdown, so he took the handkerchief from Lady Alicia's hand. All the vassals watching let out a collective sigh. Jaeger squeezed his eyes shut and massaged his temple. Joseph was surprised. He hadn't even considered that. Sir Duncan turned to Vlad, saying he really shouldn't have done that. There were a couple of ways a lady could give up a handkerchief symbolizing her honor: tie it to a sword or hand it over. The first way represents honor, trust, and loyalty. The second way means love. But Vlad, growing up in the slums, couldn't have known that. Lady Alicia looked at the young man kneeling before her, blushing and getting all flustered. Vlad swore he'd keep it safe, not understanding why his lord and Jaeger were staring like that. They were heading back to the capital, and Joseph honestly admitted he hadn't been this stressed in ages. The local poets and musicians definitely won't be out of work for a while, thanks to Vlad. The blonde guy felt super awkward. He'd already apologized like 100 times for what he did. Jaeger yelled that from now on, before accepting anything from a noble, he's got to check with him first. Joseph was cooler about it, said he was happy for the guy, whatever. So now Vlad's all respected, 'cause he's got this high-class noble lady backing him. From now on, Vlad of Swara's gonna be treated like an honorary knight. This former street kid couldn't believe he was suddenly an honorary knight. Joseph explained that officially, Vlad wasn't a knight, but anywhere Lady Alicia's name meant something, he'd get treated like one. This rule only applied within Daymar's territory, since she just became a baroness. Now the kid got what honorary knight really meant. You couldn't just become a real knight, not without putting in the work. The young master added that Vlad got the handkerchief by accident, but he better not lose it, since it was a symbol of Lady Alicia's honor. The vassal asked what would happen if he, accidentally misplaced it somewhere. The Earl's youngest son quietly said he'd have to take responsibility, since it happened because he accepted the gift with open arms. The young man swore to his lord that he would protect this handkerchief and never lose it. Joseph showed some kind of document, explaining that thanks to Vlad, he didn't need it anymore. It was some kind of IOU, a secret plan that could save Lady Alicia. The paper said she owed Bayezid 10,000 gold coins. Vlad was floored when he heard about such a massive amount of money. It was a secret plan to keep her and the soldiers under her command safe. The lord explained that she hadn't borrowed any money. Vlad wondered why Joseph had agreed to the duel. It was all for her uncle. If Alicia was under protection, he would feel the pressure from the Bayezid family. Suddenly, Vlad heard strange noises coming from the nearby woods. About a dozen riders were racing towards the young lord's carriage at top speed. Vlad gripped his sword, yelling about the bandits closing in. But Joseph just calmly told him to put the damn thing away. He'd already prepped for all this before the sacred duel even started. A squad of warriors knelt before the young lord. The mercenary captain apologized for being late, saying it was because they had a bit of a disagreement about the price. The Earl's youngest son said there was no need to apologize. They did a solid job getting here anyway, and told the man to stand up. The warrior looked at Vlad and said the word about him accepting the handkerchief had already spread all over Daimar. Joseph calmly replied that the man could pay his respects to the honored knight later. His face was covered in scars, his vibe was totally different, and the smell of danger was like Vlad was back in the freaking slums. This dude was giving off major "don't mess with me" vibes. The young master asked him to come back to the capital, but the guy was in a real hurry. The Earl's youngest understood completely and thanked him again for his help. The knight just said he was loyal to his duty as a hidden blade of Bayezid. Vlad had never heard of the hidden blade before. He was seriously intrigued, and he was also curious about what was in the black sack the knight was carrying. Joseph noticed his vassal's interest and asked if he wanted to see what was inside. The earl's youngest was silent for a couple of seconds, then calmly said it contained the piece of the nobility. Inside the sack was the severed head of André Hennel. The earl asked his advisor if he should meet the pilgrims crossing Sutruma. Guided by the voice of the gods, they're the kind of genuine people you rarely see anymore. Maybe we should just keep an eye on them, just in case. The advisor was kind enough to say he'd handle all the arrangements. The earl already knew about the heroic thing his son and Vlad had pulled off. The advisor was reading the report, and some of the words in it really touched his old heart. The first code of the sword master. Those words brought back memories for the earl. It had been a long time since he'd heard them. Elite training started with selecting people with good bloodlines and talent. Rough diamonds, polished with extra care. Seeing something like this happen nowadays is pretty damn unexpected. The earl immediately thought of the golden generation of the Bayezid family. If things keep going like this, the old-timers will start showing up with treats for the newbies. The count thought his son had given up, but he crawled through the muck and snagged a real prize. The head of the Bayezid family realized he had a lot to think about before making the right call. Ultimately, he's going to have to pick just one son to be the new head of the Bayezid family. The young trainees were jawing in the mess hall about Vlad's story and his fight with the knight. Sobanin just couldn't believe that some street punk managed to awaken an aura. Vlad walked into the mess hall, felt like he hadn't been there in over a month. He noticed the divide between the nobles and the commoners had disappeared. That ridiculous childish squabble was over. Everything changed after that slum rat showed up. Vlad sat down at the table and started chowing down on some tasty sausages he'd been missing. He could hear the other students whispering at the tables nearby, which was super annoying while he was trying to eat. The Vlad rumors aren't dying down anytime soon. Every young warrior's heard about what went down in Daimar. His new buddy couldn't help but ask where Vlad was headed for his leave. All the new recruits this month get a week off. Blondie was lost in thought, wondering if he'd get leave too. He's got no family, nowhere to go. Hearing that, Potri immediately offered him a visit. His dad officially wanted to invite Vlad over. The chubby kid confessed he'd never had guests before, or even friends for that matter. Guests at his place get treated to a ton of different meat platters and hot dishes. Potri knew perfectly well that Vlad was looking for a high-end horse. Blondie started thinking when his buddy promised to get him any horse he wanted from the province. The kid from the slums vowed he'd definitely get that leave and visit his friend. Another training session with Jaeger wasn't easy, even with the wooden swords. The knight kept hammering on about focus and paying attention. The kid missed another attack and took a shot to the back. The instructor reminded him not to bite off more than he could chew. After that duel with the knight in Daimar, the kid thought he was hot stuff. Is he just laughing off everything the knight said, completely ignoring him? Vlad got up and apologized to his teacher. Jaeger coldly replied that if the kid was just going through the motions, or thought he didn't need him, then he shouldn't bother coming back. Vlad left with his head down. He didn't want to disappoint his teacher. Truth is, the knight was super proud of his student, but his skills needed some serious fine-tuning. He was still too weak, and the current could wash him away like sand on a beach at any moment. Jaeger knew perfectly well this was way too dangerous a state to be in. The mysterious voice explained to the kid that he'd be ticked off too. The teacher did ask him to focus on the basics. Vlad was making excuses, saying he just wanted to pull off that trick one more time. The voice in his head explained that not all knights have an aura, and that doesn't mean they're weak. An aura just gives the person who has it the chance to climb even higher. The voice asked him to think about Jaeger's words again. The teacher wouldn't ask him to do something he couldn't. He was used to scorn and mockery in the slums, but this was worse. He could see the disappointment in the master's eyes. That look cut him deeper than any wooden sword strike ever could. In this situation, he probably ought to forget about his scheduled time off. Gripping his sword, he decided to train until he had some kind of breakthrough. It was late at night, and the kid was training outside like he was possessed. A voice suggested he stop, saying if he pushes too hard, too fast, he'll burn out. These grueling workouts are dangerous. If he gets injured, he'll only make things worse. Vlad agreed and started looking at the massive moon in the sky. Jaeger watched the nighttime training session with satisfaction. He remembered his master's words about the wolf endlessly chasing the moon. The Ravnoma district, Trinova, suffered a monstrous attack. A terrible slaughter took place, wiping out all the knights. It was him, the one who changed Vlad's life, the one who killed Jorge. Godwin, the knight who took on the role of executioner, traveling the region. The dying warrior reminded him that you shouldn't follow every order blindly. The knights under the former Count Guider weren't like that. Godwin replied quietly, "That's why they're all dead now." The wounded man calmly added that Godwin's light would fade someday too. He asked him to deliver his words to the new Count Guider. He said he'd be waiting for him with open arms in the deepest, darkest pit. Godwin raised his sword and promised he'd pass everything along to his lord. Joseph said Vlad's getting some time off, especially since the Kinor family invited him. The kid was totally shocked to hear his lord knew all about it. The word got around fast. Sir Gregory's boy blabbed to everyone about it. It was a simple chain, and Vlad quickly figured out how the info got to Joseph. The Earl's youngest son wanted to send the vassal on leave anyway. The master noticed the awkward silence and the way the teacher and student were looking at each other, but he decided to stay out of it. Vlad was finding it hard to breathe. He thought he should bow and leave. Jaeger broke the silence, saying a knight doesn't let go of his sword, even on vacation. If he misses a day of training, he'll feel it immediately. If he misses a week, everyone else will notice. The mentor understood he needed to guide the young man, to keep him from going astray. The knight added that he'd check how the kid trained without him after he got back. Vlad was glad Jaeger was talking to him again. He promised to train hard. Joseph added that Vlad shouldn't get his hopes up about the horses. Even the Kenor family would have a hard time finding one. He asked him to find out which horses from which region would be least likely to bolt from a vassal. Before Vlad left, his lord implied that he didn't need to bother buying them gifts on the way back. After the kid left, the heir told Jaeger they were probably going to run into him there. Joseph knew that if that guy wanted something, he'd just come out and say it. But either way, the Earl's youngest son wasn't planning on giving anything away to anyone. Vlad wasn't thrilled about trying on the new outfit. He felt self-conscious. Lady Oksana thought the clothes really suited him, especially the leather armor. He bowed low and thanked the lady, feeling super awkward and blushing. The woman reminded him that he was going as a guest, and therefore had to look the part. He's just trying to keep his parents' reputation clean. Vlad heard that and started thinking. She went over to her vassal, hugged him, and told him he had to keep her name clean too. The woman added that after vacation, she'd hire an etiquette coach. That mess with Lady Alicia was enough. Vlad apologized again for the day he accidentally took the handkerchief from the girl's hand. Lady Oksana explained that being a knight is like being half noble, so Vlad had to act accordingly. She prepared a big basket of lemons and said he needed to take them with him. Joseph brought these lemons. You can't show up empty-handed when visiting someone. Vlad bowed again and thanked her for all the care and kindness she'd shown him. Lady Oksana asked the young man to have a good time on his vacation. He had a really weird feeling, like he'd found clothes that weren't meant for him. He remembered Zemina, a girl with a tough personality who'd do anything for him. Joseph told him she was living in a convent now. The young man closed his eyes, hoping she was doing okay. She's probably stuck wearing clothes that totally aren't her style. The nuns were gossiping about some new guy at the Bayzid house. Someone said he was a real looker. He's got this aura about him at such a young age, he'll probably be a knight representing the North soon. Zemina scrubbed the floor hard, trying not to think about it. No way Vlad could have grown up so fast. I just hope he's still kicking. The nuns yelled at the redhead to finish up already, or the head sister would be all over her. Those mean girls knew Zemina had nowhere else to go, so they were always messing with her and making her do the dirty work. Zamina wasn't afraid of dirty work. She grew up in the slums and had seen it all. The head nun didn't want to take in girls from the, establishment. Marcella raised her voice. The girls she brought were innocent, and the bishop himself was watching over them. The head sister still wasn't thrilled about taking them into the monastery, but Marcella reminded her how much money she donated to the monastery. They could feed the girls for 10 years and still have money left over. The nun wouldn't even let her inside, saying she was a sinner unworthy of entering. The woman sighed quietly. She hadn't expected to go inside anyway. Marcella just asked her to take care of the girls. One-armed Jack's bandits appeared on the horizon. Marcella ordered them to get inside quickly and lock the doors behind them. The lowlifes grabbed the woman they were too scared to even look at yesterday. Zamina was reaching for her, sobbing and screaming the name of the woman who'd become her mother. Thugs were dragging her by the hair across the cold ground. Her fate was going to be messed up. When Vlad got there, he was blown away. Even though the Patry family were nobles, he never imagined they lived like this. Their family estate was just massive, like a freaking king lived there. The gates swung open, and the butler bowed, welcoming the young master. Patry yelled and threw his arms up, stoked to be back home. The kid hugged the man like his own dad and told him how much he missed him. The young man wanted to know where his father was and why he wasn't there to greet them. The butler explained that the head of the family was busy meeting some very important guests. He suggested they take a look at the pasture in the meantime, the family's pride and joy. Vlad said that was cool, and they'd be happy to take a stroll. The kid was really looking forward to seeing those champion horses, 'cause he's got some big dreams. The butler promised the owner himself would show off the best stallions, but in the meantime, he could check out the rest. The guy was cool with walking Patry and Vlad over to the pasture. The horses freaked out at the sight of Vlad, like he was the boogeyman himself. Every animal, cows, horses, the whole herd bolted out of there, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust. The kid was bummed. Even the cows were running away from him. The butler wondered if the young vassal had been to church lately. The blonde guy politely said that Father Andres was his sponsor, so it wasn't some kind of curse. Watching the horses, he knew this problem was starting to drive him nuts. Soon, while everyone else is chasing down the enemy on horseback, he'll be stuck running and eating their dust. Patry swore he'd show off every single horse. You telling me there isn't even one he can't tame? Vlad was totally bummed. The fact that horses were scared of him was starting to really mess with his head. My buddy mentioned his dad brought back some seriously impressive horses, top-of-the-line pedigree and all. My friend suggested we chill for a bit, said dinner was going to be something Vlad would never forget. Walking into the kitchen with Patry, Vlad was practically speechless at what he saw. The blonde whispered to his friend that nothing in his house was ever simple. Guaranteed. Orson Kinor, the head of the house, came into the kitchen, happy to see his son and his new friend. Vlad bowed and gave his name. Orson knew all about him. Word about the talented young guy spread fast in Suturme. Patry's dad was glad his son had a friend like that. The guy told him to make himself at home. He suggested they head to his study and chat until dinner was ready. Orson had visitors today, and they were also from the Bezid family. Vlad walked into the study and just froze when he saw him. The Earl's eldest son was sitting by the fireplace with his entourage, vassals, and knights. Rudiger smiled at the blonde and asked how he was doing. It had been a while. Vlad and Patry bowed as etiquette demanded, and the young man quietly said he hadn't expected to see him here. Rudiger asked if Vlad would mind joining him at the table, saying the food here was too tempting to pass up for dinner. The young man understood perfectly what the Earl's eldest son meant. It was a reminder of how he turned down the peanuts. Vlad looked at the Lord's vassals. Their gazes were extremely unfriendly. They looked like they hated him and were ready to tear him to shreds. He couldn't let himself be intimidated, so the former street kid said in a confident voice that he, like the Lord, was looking forward to dinner. Rudiger knew the guy was on vacation, so he asked if he could spare some time tomorrow. The Earl's eldest son suggested they hang out somewhere together tomorrow. It wasn't just a regular stroll or hunt. Rudiger had a specific goal in mind. Vlad still wasn't thrilled about what was going on. He'd give anything to not be there. Dorothy couldn't figure out why the blonde guy had been staring at her for hours. Had he never seen a beastman before? Vlad whispered coldly that there's a first time for everything in this life. Dorothy couldn't shake the feeling that the slum kid suddenly becoming an honorary knight and a member of the Bassaid family was weird. The young man replied that it wasn't surprising, considering Lord Rudiger's mage was a beastman. Dorothy wouldn't let it go, asking how someone who awakened their aura still hadn't learned to ride a horse. Even Fatty Patri could handle horses easily. The slum kid replied that things happen. Vlad was praying to every god he knew that Dorothy would finally shut her yap. The vassal couldn't figure out why they'd rushed into this hunt so suddenly. The guy snapped and asked straight up if all beastkin were this chatty. Dorothy took it as a personal attack. Rudiger jumped in, telling Dorothy to lay off the guest. He was hard enough to convince to come along. The mage turned to their lord, saying Vlad always looked constipated when he looked at her. The count's eldest son just said everyone reacted that way. One of the vassals found a sweet spot, a huge field with killer visibility. Patri figured they'd finally picked a decent hunting ground. But Vlad knew damn well the count's eldest son and his crew weren't here to hunt. They hadn't even gotten the hunting hawk out of its cage, which they should have released already. One of the knights addressed their lord, pointing off into the distance. Rudiger was stoked. He figured they got lucky finding them so fast. It was a group of pilgrims heading out on some kind of holy quest. The Earl's oldest son ordered the flag raised so the pilgrims wouldn't freak. With all the formalities out of the way, Rudiger figured it was time to look for some spoils. Not too far from there, a herd of wild horses was grazing. The leader, a huge night-black stallion, sensed something was up. Rudiger and his crew kept their distance, watching the pilgrims pass. Vlad knew the deal. The hunt was just a cover. The real goal was escorting and protecting the pilgrims. Tired of riding in the wagon, Vlad hopped out and decided to walk a bit. He felt his heart rate spike again. The guy figured it was just from bouncing around in that wagon for so long. The scenery was incredible. Potri had been dying to show his buddy this. The fields stretched all the way to Varna. Thanks to Joseph's winter campaign, there's hardly any monsters around here. Vlad knew exactly what he was talking about. He'd even taken part in that conquest himself. It felt good knowing that he, even in a small way, had contributed to this peaceful, monster-free landscape. In the distance, he spotted some kind of cloud. It was hard to tell if it was dust or smoke. A herd of horses, with a huge black stallion galloping out in front. Vlad felt a weird energy, like electricity coursing through his body. His heart started pounding, but nothing hurt. Rudiger watched the herd of wild horses from the hill. They were unwelcome guests to him. The count's oddball son noticed something strange. They should be heading north for fresh grass, not south. The air knew their movements were too weird, like they were running from something. Vlad's eyes lit up. He realized the horses were freaked out. The ground shook. The vassals told their lord it was an earthquake, but Vlad knew exactly what it was. He remembered that vibration all too well. A horrifying monster burst out of the ground with incredible speed. That's what the wild horses were trying to outrun as fast as they could. A grave worm, descendant of a fallen dragon, a terrible beast that's hard to deal with. With its massive jaws, it grabbed a horse and tore it to pieces. Dorothy shouted that something was wrong. These worms aren't predators. They don't eat meat. The mage noticed a strange stone on the creature's forehead, radiating a dark aura. One of the vassals warned the lord that the horses had changed direction and were headed straight for the pilgrims. And the worst part is, a terrifying grave worm is chasing after those horses, capable of destroying everything in its path. The pilgrims scattered as soon as they saw the stampede of horses and that giant monster bearing down on them. The Earl's eldest son asked his mage what the grave worm might react to. The beastman replied that it has neither eyes nor ears. It orients itself by the vibrations in the ground. He ordered the mage to get ready and find a way to distract the monster. Vlad Rudiger ordered Dorothy to be taken to high ground and protected from all threats. The moment she figures out how to distract the monster, they need to report to him immediately. The blonde guy didn't ask any unnecessary questions and promised to carry out the order. Rudiger drew his sword and addressed his loyal vassals and knights. Whether this situation makes any sense or not is irrelevant. What matters is being where you are and doing what you gotta do. Today, their main mission is to complete the assignment from Count Bazid. Now, they gotta protect those pilgrims from the grave worm, no matter what it takes. Rudiger knew damn well that everything happening was totally unnatural. Someone's definitely behind all this. Someone looking to tear down the world as we know it. The Count's eldest son was pissed that someone dared to pull this crap on his family's land. Dorothy laid out a bunch of vials of magic juice, trying to figure out the color of the vibe. The engraving was a kind of mystery, like an aura or something divine. The mystery itself was a holy trinity made up of 3 key things. Vlad finally understood that Dorothy wasn't just Rudiger's mage for nothing. A massive pillar of fire erupted in the field, visible to the vassals up on the high ground. Vlad and Patri even shouted in surprise. They had no idea what was going on. It was the Earl's eldest son. He used his aura to lure the monster towards him and keep it from catching the pilgrims. Vlad saw his power for the first time and was shocked at just how mighty the young master was. But the voice in his head thought it was all just for show. The young master couldn't possibly be ready for this. The grave worm decided against a fight and burrowed back underground. The loyal knights were worried about their master and told him not to push his luck. But the Earl's eldest son wasn't thinking about his own safety. He was worried about the pilgrims, so he ordered them to stay sharp and find the monster. The mysterious mentor explained that no matter how strong you are, once the grave worm goes underground, there's nothing you can do. Rudiger ordered them to find the creature. It had to be somewhere nearby. One of the knights spotted movement and immediately pointed it out to his lord. The monster's back at it, hunting down those helpless pilgrims. They're on foot, so they can't get far. The Earl's oldest son charged after it, yelling at his men to keep up. Vlad shouted to the mage that they needed to hurry, or something terrible was gonna happen. He turned and saw the beastkin doodling on a piece of paper with the tip of her tail. The blonde guy was like, seriously? Is now the time for this? Dorothy was pissed. This wasn't just messing around. It was a special technique from her people. She'd just finished what she needed to do. Now they could lure that worm out. Holding up the paper, she told Patri he needed to get this to Rudiger ASAP. To activate it, just rub or tear the paper. This marking spell was draining her. She couldn't even walk a couple of yards right now. A mysterious mentor's voice explained to Vlad that even on horseback, he couldn't catch the worm while it was underground. Vlad reached out, a desperate plan already forming in his head. He snatched the paper with the spell and charged forward like a bat out of hell. Dorothy screamed for him to stop. She had no clue what the blonde was thinking. Getting a good head of steam, Vlad pushed off and jumped from the high cliff they'd been standing on. He plummeted down the cliff face at breakneck speed. He knew damn well that Rudiger had the best knights in the Bayside family, and someone like him shouldn't get involved. But the thought of that black stallion, the leader of the wild horse herd, just lit a fire under this vassal's ass. He remembered all too well that feeling when your home gets wrecked by some unstoppable force and you're powerless to do anything. Lost in thought, Vlad lost his focus, tripped, and went tumbling down. The landing was quick, but it was a real bone-jarring slam. Dorothy and Patri were blown away that the guy survived a fall from that height. There it was again, that black stallion, with a whole herd of horses behind it. The animal could see the glow coming off the young vassal, something regular folks couldn't see. It was all thanks to the serpent bloom. The voice in his head explained that if the spirit hadn't gifted it to him, the kid would be a goner right now. That was insane. The voice suggested they head back to that grave sometime and meet the serpent spirit again. Vlad promised they'd go back there, but for now, they had to rescue those pilgrims. Vlad noticed that Priest Andres was among them, the same guy who'd helped him out plenty of times. Lord Rudiger's too far away. The grave worm will get here before the knights do. The clergy were in danger, and there was only one play left. The voice in his head whispered that sometimes destiny comes along disguised as chance, forcing you to make a choice. Vlad tossed the scroll with the secret incantation high into the air. Gripping his sword, he knew he was out of options, and had to act now. He slashed through the secret incantation with his weapon, activating it. He couldn't hesitate. Dozens of lives hung in the balance because of his decision. The sword began to glow with ancient runes in a long-forgotten language. The guy raised it hilt up. Then, with immense force, he plunged it into the ground to lure the grave worm to him. A voice in his head advised him to use his aura. The spell wasn't enough. Vlad began to glow with a blue light, and he yelled loudly for the monster to look at him. Naturally, the descendant of the fallen dragon sensed such powerful energy. It burst from the earth at incredible speed, right next to the young vassal. The kid raised his sword, ready to fight that beast no matter what. The scion of the fallen dragon was going to make short work of this young punk. The guy barely managed to dodge the monster's nasty attack. A mysterious mentor's voice warned him not to engage, just keep his distance. All he had to do was distract the thing until Lord Rudiger showed up with the knights. Vlad glanced back, but the Lord and his crew were still way off. The giant creature attacked again, and the blonde looked up too late. With earth-shattering force, the grave worm slammed its jaws into the ground. If he'd hesitated for even a split second, he'd be a goner. The scion of the fallen dragon burrowed back underground. The kid had no idea where he was. The ground shook right under the ex-street kid. A voice in his head screamed at him to dodge. A grave worm burst from the earth right beneath the guy. He barely had any space between him and the monster's jaws. Lord Rudiger was close enough to see the whole horrifying scene. But the dust started to clear, and a figure on horseback emerged. Soon, the Earl's eldest son could clearly see that it was Vlad riding a wild black Mustang. The young vassal himself could barely believe he was actually riding a horse. The mysterious mentor's voice told him to use his aura to look at the animal's forehead. The SLUM kid saw something incredible. A glowing aura coming from the horse's forehead. It was a sign of a spirit. The stallion carried the blood of a true unicorn. Vlad was ecstatic because he finally understood what it was like to ride a horse. Finally, Lord Rudiger and his knights showed up. First thing he asked was if Vlad was okay. The Earl's eldest son noticed the engraving on the vassal's sword. Hard to believe the kid actually went through with it. He was impressed that the kid was willing to put himself on the line for others. He was acting like a true swordsman. The young lord praised Vlad, saying he did his duty better than actual knights. Then he asked if the vassal could keep luring the grave worm. The pilgrims will only be safe if the descendant of the fallen dragon bites the dust. Vlad understood what the heir was saying, but how are they supposed to kill a beast that terrifying? Rudiger had a plan, but Vlad would have to keep the worm busy for a little while longer. The Earl's eldest son believed Vlad could handle it. He's got the engraving on his sword, and he's riding a hell of a horse. The kid looked at the horse, worried if he'd even be able to ride it. He looked into the wild Mustang's eyes and knew the animal just wanted to protect its herd. He and that street kid had that in common. He had to distract Worm, get around that big hill. Rudiger would be waiting on the other side, and he'd take care of the rest. The blonde broke away from the group and took off to carry out the order. Worm was chasing him hard. The vassal had to stay focused, keep the beast from turning its attention on anyone else. The kid yelled at the horse to go faster, and the wild animal seemed to understand every word. Rudiger's knights were stunned by how incredibly fast the blonde was riding. Both Worm and the horse were crazy fast, way faster than the best steeds in the Bayezid family. A mysterious voice told him to lower his sword and touch the ground, so the monster could sense his presence. The kid was practically carving a trench in the earth, and the monster was right behind him, trying to catch the vassal. The Earl's eldest son ordered the knights to get the pilgrims to safety. The rest of them needed to prepare for things to get real bad. Vlad wasn't far off now, and the grave worm was closing in on the brave squire. Rudiger braced himself for a fight, activating his fiery aura. Vlad saw the heir instantly use his aura, and a voice in his head explained that only those who deeply understood their inner selves could do that. Rudiger Bayezid turned out to be a seriously powerful knight who never bragged about it. The grave worm sensed the older son's strong aura and headed straight for him. The vassal knew it was too soon, that Rudiger wasn't ready for this fight, but Vlad's aura was weaker and wouldn't attract the monster. The new steed came to the rescue, closing in on the monster and circling around it. The aura of the unicorn descendant and the world of the blossoming serpent began to resonate together. The descendant of the fallen dragon once again turned his attention to the guy. An unlikely alliance, a knight without a horse and a unicorn without a horn, coming together to form a powerful bond. A new, bright star appeared in this dark black sky, offering a beacon of hope. Vlad was holding on with everything he had, but he couldn't keep up his aura for much longer. But just when his strength was almost gone, Rudiger's retinue came to his aid. The knights closed in around him, urging their vassal not to give up and to just hang in there a little longer. They were all using their auras too, trying to draw the creature's attention to themselves. One of the eldest son's men told the vassal to head straight and just ride past their lord. As Vlad sped by, he managed to catch the heir's words. He said it was a job well done. Now it was his turn to do his part and rid these lands of this monster. He managed to create a fiery tornado with his aura, something that could burn everything in its path. The worm was trapped, and the Earl's eldest son unleashed all his power on the gigantic beast. The pilgrims watching this were blown away by how the heir was able to use his power. Vlad knew before that the Earl's eldest son was very powerful, but only now was he convinced of it in practice. His true world was vast and incomprehensible. He could burn anyone to a crisp. Vlad immediately remembered Jaeger and Godwin. He felt like he'd never be that strong, but a voice in his head assured Vlad that if he kept training, the time would come when he would become the strongest. When everyone calmed down, the vassal approached his lord to see if he was all right. Rudiger replied that he needed to rest a bit, and added that the young man had done a great job. Vlad was worried that the fields around them might burn down, but the Earl's eldest son explained that the grass was wet and the fire would soon die down. The mysterious mentor explained to the guy that even someone like Rudiger is exhausted after using his aura. He held out his hand to the vassal and asked if he was going to help him get up off the ground. But Vlad just plopped down next to him, saying he wouldn't mind chilling for a bit either. The Earl's son was a little surprised at how Vlad rode that wild horse. The guy explained that, despite the rumors, the problem wasn't him. It was an unusual horse, wild and freedom-loving, but loyal to its herd at the same time. Rudiger's entourage came over. The knights were praising the vassal and weren't mad anymore about him roughing up their squires the other day. They were amazed by his courage and strength. Each of them considered it an honor to sit next to him. The blonde dude wasn't ready for this and got super embarrassed. He thanked the warriors. Priest Andres, along with some pilgrims, came to thank the heroes. Despite the huge distance, he recognized Vlad right away. His light was like a knife cutting through the night. Kneeling down, the Reverend took the guy's hand and thanked him for everything. The Holy Father thanked God for the boy who received the Almighty's will. On this day, countless hearts prayed in praise of a single Savior. The young warrior's world was expanding at breakneck speed. The Earl asked his advisor if he was sure it was true. The old man explained that Dorothy had sent the message. He sent his son and the knights just in case, but someone used dark magic again. The empire's weakened, so the ancient, problematic entities are slowly waking up. The advisor pointed out there was good news too. The Earl agreed. He'd been hearing Vlad's name way too much. Monster hunts in the winter, a duel he didn't lose, and now helping to kill the grave worm. Maybe if it weren't for this vassal, the Bayezid family would be facing disgrace. The family head asked his loyal assistant to call his youngest son to the study. The time has come to grant permission. Worthy people should enjoy the rights they've earned. Late that night, Vlad sat alone by the campfire, sharpening his sword. His weapon, just like him, had been through a lot. Suddenly, Rudiger approached from behind and asked why the kid was moping by the fire all alone. The Earl's eldest son wondered where Patri had gone. Vlad told him Dorothy took him. Priest Andres, along with the other pilgrims, headed off for evening prayers. Rudiger held out a bottle of whiskey and offered his vassal a couple of swigs. The heir was hoping he wouldn't get turned down this time. First he wouldn't take the peanuts, then he wouldn't shake hands, and now he's refusing a drink, like Vlad's disrespecting his lord. Vlad apologized and took the bottle of booze with both hands. Maybe the brothers had different personalities, but a taste for expensive liquor united them. Seeing how badly his vassal's sword was damaged, he suggested getting it repaired. Vlad said the family smith recommended replacing the handle entirely. The sword's construction is unique, so it's best to find the smith who forged it. Rudiger took another swig and then added that the smith is just as crazy as the sword's owner. To the young man, this sword was more than just a weapon. It connected him to his past. Vlad added that he absolutely had to find that smith. The Earl's eldest son inquired as to the master's whereabouts. The vassal held the sword to his face and quietly replied, "Sore." The heir smiled. He remembered how the squire always shouted that he was Vlad from Soar. Getting to his feet, Rudiger said that Vlad would soon be able to fix it. The young man didn't understand what the heir meant. He told the kid to get some sleep, said they'd been through a rough day. Vlad agreed with Rudiger. Someday he'd get back to Soaru and fix that sword, because that sword meant he always had a place to return to, something to remember. That same night, Lady Oksana was working on embroidering crests. The first was the Heinel family crest, and it looked absolutely amazing. Then she started on the second crest. She didn't need to look at a book. It was burned into her memory forever. She'd never embroidered it in her life, but she remembered her mother doing it. This tradition's almost forgotten, 'cause knights these days are raised soft, and they ain't worthy to raise the flag. A flag that belongs only to them, and nobody else. One of Rudiger's men pointed and told his lord he'd never seen anything like it. A herd of wild horses was running alongside them, like they were showing their gratitude for everything that happened yesterday. The Earl's eldest son replied that it was a really rare sight. Maybe they'd never see something like that again. This brief encounter was special and unforgettable, not just for Vlad, but for the leader of the wild horses too. The guy looked at the Mustang with unicorn blood in him, and knew perfectly well it was time to say goodbye. Because he, just like Vlad, had a goal he needed to reach. The black horse had to protect his herd and lead them to new pastures. The blonde guy mentally said goodbye to the amazing animal that saved his life. The priest told the vassal not to be upset about having to say goodbye. A person's whole life is a cycle of hellos and goodbyes. At the end of the day, the depth of a connection doesn't depend on how much time you've spent together. Head of the Bayezid family heard about Count Ravnoma's downfall, and it threw him for a loop. The advisor filled him in on the urgent intel they'd just received. The West's been acting real shady. Where'd Gaidor get that kind of power? Maybe the Western houses cooked up some kind of alliance with Count Gaidor. The family head just couldn't figure out why the royal family wasn't stepping in. He had a hard time believing a regional count's family could fall so fast. With the new rules and new bosses, a family holding an ancient pact just wasn't relevant anymore. Bayezid knew damn well some tough times were rolling in. He noticed priests down below unloading some kind of huge sarcophagus. Now it hit him. These weren't just any pilgrims. They were refugees from Evenness, and they brought the sacred pact with them. Vlad headed back. He was worried that helping Rudiger would screw up his relationship with Joseph. He could already picture Jaeger cracking his knuckles, ready to teach his vassal a lesson. Vlad entered the lord's room and greeted him. Joseph noticed the squire was back a day early. Joseph already knew everything. He asked if the kid got hurt fighting the grave worm. Vlad said he was fine, but the lord told him he needed to take care of himself. At first glance, It seemed like the Earl's youngest son looked the same as always. But for some reason, Vlad thought it was an act, and he was about to get punished. The heir quickly changed the subject, asking if it was true that gang wars only end when every member of one side is dead. The vassal was totally caught off guard by the question, but he came clean and admitted that's exactly how it was. Joseph added that the poet's squire was specifically barred from sending letters. He was talking about the redhead he was sweet on, who was currently living in a convent. Vlad's face fell, and he quietly said that she was just a friend. Anyway, Joseph was saying that you can't send any intel to SOAR because it could put people in danger. Figuring out this problem took a lot of time and effort. One-armed Jack used to be valuable to the family in his own way, but things are different now. Joseph slowly got up from the table and said that Vlad had proven his worth and done a hell of a job. The kid fought hard for the heir for a long time, and now he has to pay him back. Joseph looked at the flag that represented a knight's honor, the same one the heir's grandfather used. He could never carry it with pride himself, so he chose the one who deserved it most. Vlad's worthy to bear this banner, and the Bayezid family guarantees its worth. The heir extended the banner and ordered him to take it and return to SOAR with pride. Joseph wanted the kid to crush all their enemies there and get rid of the pain. He looked at the heir, speechless, barely holding back tears of emotion. It all started when they gave him a simple sword, an old blacksmith, and a loyal friend. Then the priest personally handed him the squire's certificate and became his confidant. Lady Alicia gave him her handkerchief with her name. She entrusted him with her own honor. And finally, Joseph presented the banner with the Bayezid family crest. Vlad was acknowledged. Vlad knelt, cried, and croaked that he would fulfill his lord's command. Father Andres stood before the count, a massive sarcophagus looming behind him. Inside was nothing less than the sacred proof of the pact. The Reverend confirmed that the remains of an ancient dragon were inside, a fragment of a perfect dragon, one that the founding father managed to defeat. The padre apologized, but only Count Ravnoma could protect the ancient pact in the West. The head of the Bayezid family promised he'd provide the best knights and help them safely reach their destination. He suggested the pilgrims remain here peacefully as guests until all the preparations were complete. Bayezid the Elder rose from his throne. He understood that they simply had no other choice. The only one who could be a reliable guardian of the pact is the ruler of the north, Duke Timur Baranov. He knew he couldn't do anything about it, but that didn't make the burden on his shoulders any lighter. The count spotted a flag in the window, one he hadn't seen in ages. Way too long since a knight last ran that thing up the pole. The head of the family figured the kid could use a break before heading out, but the advisor thought Vlad was about to blow. Bayezid agreed. He wouldn't be able to sit still in Vlad's shoes either. A knight who answers to no one, marching under his own banner, a knight banneret. Vlad's carriage rolled out of Count Bayezid's estate and headed for SOAR. That night, he slipped back into his old neighborhood, hood up so nobody recognized him. A crowd of lowlifes were waiting outside the brothel, waiting for her to come out. Marcella was sitting at her mirror, fixing herself up. The new owner of the place was on her back to get to work. She's got to service a whole lot of clients to pay off her debt. The madam was pissed that the woman hadn't lost her pride and composure. She finished getting ready and walked out of the room to a pack of hungry thugs. Their lustful eyes were all over the beautiful woman. They all dreamed of having her. The brothel owner demanded to see the gold coins. Without them, no one gets a taste of Marcella. One of the criminals shouted that he only had 1 coin. Others were willing to offer 2 gold coins. Some of the more resourceful guys wanted to chip in 3 ways to get a piece of Marcella. Suddenly, someone yelled out an insane amount. 100 gold coins! The brothel owner was shocked. She'd never seen anyone that rich in the slums. He slowly walked up the stairs and repeated the amount. 100 gold coins. A chill ran down the woman's spine. She knew that sound all too well. That sound marked the complete destruction of her old life. She was terrified. Could it be? Had he come back for her to finish the job? The madam double-checked. asking if she understood correctly that he was offering 100 gold. The stranger confidently strode between the thugs and criminals. Reaching the bar, he asked them to take his order. The madam started to offer the menu, but he said he knew it by heart. He asked for grilled sausages and black pudding, and Marcella went pale at those words. The woman clutched her face when she saw who pulled back the hood. It was that kid, the street urchin Jorge brought into their house, the one Marcella used to bathe. But he looked at the woman and announced loudly that he was back home. She had a hard time believing this was actually happening, and not just a dream. She begged Vlad to get out of there fast, or they'd kill him. One-armed Jack runs this place now. The new madam was surprised, realizing Marcella knew this young guy. The old woman decided to shut this down before things got out of hand. She gave a hand signal to those working for Money Grub. These were hired guns, used to taking people out for cash. Vlad announced loudly that before he got paid, they needed to settle up. One-armed Jack owed him, and he was here to collect. The merc leader gripped his sword, thinking the blonde had lost it. Nobody dared say their boss's name so casually. The merc didn't even finish his sentence before Vlad slit his throat. Pointing his dagger at the old woman, Vlad warned that if he didn't get enough guys, he'd deal with her too. The mercs couldn't figure out how this guy took out their experienced leader in one move. They wanted to know who sent him, and Vlad quietly whispered the name Jorge. He was his last trump card, and now it was time to settle the score. One of the lowlifes recognized Vlad. The blonde hair, the blue eyes. They all thought he'd kicked the bucket in some ditch that night. One of the thugs remembered Jack promising a fortune to whoever brought him the kid's head. Vlad was done talking, his eyes were burning, and he was ready to throw down. He looked more like a bloodthirsty wolf than some kid from the slums. The guy wanted to wrap this up quick, so he charged right into the pack of lowlifes. His moves were precise and fast. One strike, one enemy down. He could easily handle fighting multiple guys at once. Every thrust of his dagger snuffed out another one of Jack's goons. With tears in her eyes, Marcella watched this brutal beatdown. Vlad was taking down enemies for every tear that woman shed. One-armed Jack was holed up in his room, hitting the whiskey hard. He was thinking about Jorge. Ever since he was gone, he owned every alley in Suara. Money Grub was aiming even higher, and he wasn't planning on stopping. He was standing on a mountain of his enemies' corpses, but it still wasn't enough. But that fateful night, he realized that the life of the slums was controlled by those way up the food chain. Guys like that night, who took out Jorge like it was nothing. Jack knew damn well that one day, the same thing would happen to him. This messed up life ultimately depends on a few words from whoever's calling the shots. One of his goons burst into the room and said they had a major situation. The whole block was surrounded by military, every alley sealed off. It was the Suara garrison, and despite the late hour, they were blocking every entrance and exit to Jack's place. Money Grub looked at the hook where his hand used to be. He knew this day was coming. Vlad finally took care of all the thugs in that brothel. Vordan got word that the garrisons locked down every escape route. The mayor was whining that he personally couldn't do anything about one-armed Jack. The city's governor couldn't figure out how the knights knew so much about the Suara slums. The mayor said he was glad the knights and soldiers arrived, meaning the cancers getting cut out of the city. But Vordan knew damn well the real cancer of Suara was its mayor. For the right price, he'd turn a blind eye to anything. The mayor wanted to know when the knights who deal with Jack were showing up. Vordan pointed to Vlad walking down the alley and added that he's the knight who's gonna handle everything. The mayor was horrified. Did the Bezid family really send just one guy? That's not gonna be enough. But Vordan was calm and confident. Master Joseph had done a damn good job preparing this night. Today was Vlad's official debut, and nobody better screw it up for him. Vordan whispered that Vlad could call in the troops if things went south. Joseph would have his hide. But the blue-eyed blonde promised that even if he got roughed up, he'd do everything to keep the knight safe. He handed Vlad his banner, the flag of a free knight. The kid jammed his own banner right into the hard-packed dirt of the slums. The soldiers behind him were in shock. They thought that tradition was long dead. Now this land was his turf, and he'd come to clean it up. Sir Vordan unsealed the official message stating that Peter Bezid, owner of Sawara, had passed judgment on Jack and sent a proxy to carry out the verdict. The proxy has all the rights of the Bezid family, as well as authority confirmed by the church. Vordan yelled that one-armed Jack had better let his envoy in right now. Moneybug was sitting in his office, heard everything loud and clear. The knight pointed out that Vlad had every right. He should act without hesitation. Vlad gripped his sword. He wanted to be done with the past already. A voice in his head warned him to be ready for anything. Jack and his goons were trouble. The voice also told Vlad to start the fight strong and take the lead. Vlad remembered that day. If he hadn't brought Godwin, maybe Jorge would still be alive. If one-armed Jack hadn't threatened Jorge, they wouldn't have needed to call the knight for help. All this time, there were so many ifs and buts that kept Vlad up at night. The time has come for Vlad to put an end to all of this. The thugs couldn't even get close to the kid. His aura was just blinding them. He walked in there with one thing on his mind: to bury the past and get revenge. Looking at Jack's goons, he announced loud and clear that his name was Vlad, from Sawara. He's not just Bezid's right-hand man, but the rightful avenger come to settle the score for Jorge. Raising his sword high, he shouted he was back, all so Jack would hear him. Moneygrub jumped out of his chair like he'd been jolted awake. The head of the syndicate clutched his face and roared with laughter. He knew that voice. So, the rising star of the Bezid family, the one everyone's talking about, has come for my head. One of the bandits barked an order to grab the punk who dared threaten their crew. Like a swarm of dogs, one-armed Jack's goons charged at Vlad. This battle kicked off, but it was more like a straight-up bloodbath. The cowards were too scared to get close, so the local bosses were pushing the low-level thugs forward while they hung back. They even tried to surround Vlad, clueless about what was coming. He saw their whole play and dared them to come at him all at once. But nobody wanted to throw the first punch. The losers were too afraid to lose their pathetic lives. Vlad, realizing they'd never make a move, quietly muttered that he'd just have to do it himself. The free knight unleashed his aura and charged his sword with energy. Enemies dropped like flies, Vlad's sword striking true, never missing. He was surrounded by more and more corpses of guys who were just celebrating a few minutes ago. The gang members were clueless how to stop him. They couldn't even get close. Those sneaky guys on the second floor thought they could drop metal nets on me. But you can't scare a young knight with tricks like that. I was moving so fast, those lowlifes couldn't even keep up. The mercs saw I ducked behind a pillar, where their nets were useless. One of the head guys ordered them to block the stairs, so I couldn't get to the second floor. They built a barricade and got ready to clobber anyone who tried to come up. Blondie here knew that charging straight ahead would be way too risky. The curtains? Zaina was always complaining about how heavy they were. I sliced the rope and zipped up to the second floor in a flash. The thugs definitely weren't expecting that. They were waiting for me at the stairs, and I came at them from behind. They were begging the guys on the first floor to get their butts up here. Vlad's eyes were burning blue. Is that all these syndicate goons can throw at me? He lunged at them like a starving wolf that had been tracking its prey for days. They couldn't wrap their heads around how he handled his sword, how easily he blocked every strike. Vlad remembered his mentor's wooden sword. That thing was way more dangerous than these guys' steel blades. He spaced out for a second and almost ate an arrow. There were a few archers on the second floor trying to put an arrow in Vlad's back, but their attempts were pathetic because Vlad was moving faster than their arrows could fly. His razor-sharp sword knew no mercy. Every swing meant another life gone. On his way through, he spotted a hot kettle. Talk about perfect timing. Vlad gulped down a few greedy mouthfuls. His throat was parched. After he'd had his fill, he asked his enemies if they'd start this time, or if he'd have to take the initiative again. They were living in his house, and he'd come here to collect the rent. The place everyone used to call Rose's Smile belonged to Vlad. It was his nest. Harvin was doing the accounting. He thought Jack had lost his mind. The guy was blatantly ripping everyone off. After Jorge died, he felt untouchable, and he started doing some really messed up stuff. If things keep going this way, the whole slum economy is gonna collapse. One of the assistants opened the door to the room and told them the slums were locked down. Harvin was surprised. Who had the guts to do that? The guy's face changed when he heard it was the garrison from the capital, and they were after Jack. Even if Jack kicks the bucket, the slums are gonna drown in blood. All-out war's gonna break loose. My buddy here was asking, ain't Harvin kinda tight with Vlad? This cripple couldn't figure why the other dude brought up that name. The guy said some blonde dude showed up from the capital, called himself Vlad from Swara. Harvin froze. He couldn't believe it. His pal Vlad was the star of the Besaid family? Harvin heard stories about the duel and the hit on Worm, but he never figured it was their Vlad. The dude grabbed his cane and decided to head over to Jack's place himself, check out this blonde guy from the capital. Meanwhile, this freelance knight was tearing through the Moneybug Syndicate guys. Seemed like there was no end to these lowlifes. They were crawling out of every crack in the building. The mysterious voice was stoked with his student. Just the sight of the kid made these scumbags lose their nerve. The blonde's talent was astonishing, even to him. He was proud of his student. Vlad was a natural-born killer, unmatched in the Swara slums. The kid finally found the old lowlife who wronged him. He whispered that the jerk had plenty of time to fix his teeth. Raising his sword, he added that they wouldn't have done him any good anyway. Vlad was the only one left standing in the hallway. Everyone else was dead. He carved a path to Jack's room through a mountain of criminal corpses. Vlad glanced at the narrow staircase leading up. Time to finish what he came here to do. He kicked open the door. Jack was already expecting him. Vlad said in a steady voice that he was here. He'd been waiting for this day for a long time. The head of the syndicate sat alone at the bar. He poured a glass of whiskey and offered a drink to the rising star everyone's been talking about. Only now did Jack realize that this was the Vlad from Swara everyone was buzzing about. He downed another shot of whiskey. He'd heard all sorts of rumors, but for some reason he refused to believe them. He should have found that kid that night and knocked some sense into him personally. Jack got up from his chair. He'd been avoiding Vlad because he didn't want anything to do with him. But now he's got to see this thing through to the end. Vlad was calm. He no longer felt the respect and fear he once had. Now the kid was sure Jack was just another lowlife he was about to take out. Vlad decided to strike first. Their swords clashed. Enemies locked eyes. Looking at one-armed Jack, the kid figured he'd fight with honor and respect. Moneybags was strong enough to block the kid's hit, but this guy had serious skill. Vlad leaped high. His focus was intense, totally locked in. There was only one way to earn respect in the slums, but it was way too brutal. Vlad was hitting with savage force. He'd never pushed himself this hard before. Jack tried to fight back, putting up a brave fight, but his skills just weren't up to par. He landed blows on Vlad's guard, but the blonde easily blocked all the one-armed boss's attacks. Jack, just like Vlad, was born in the slums, and he had a dream to escape this hellhole and reach for a life of luxury. He needed any kind of power to achieve his goals and change his miserable existence. He chose a different path: blood, violence, and pain. That's how he dreamed of gaining power and breaking free from the slums. This messed up path let him climb high in the slums. But that childhood dream of luxury stayed just out of reach. The star that burned so bright got swallowed by greed and blood. This was the day Jack's chickens came home to roost. With one brutal strike, Vlad chopped off the syndicate boss's only hand. Jack was supposed to shine and become worthy, but he couldn't resist the temptation. But Vlad could. Money Grubber laughed his head off, sure that Jorge would have gotten a kick out of this. The mention of Jorge sent the guy into a rage, and he came down on the gang leader even harder. Vlad hated him for everything he'd done, for all the pain he caused Marcella. The guy screamed that Jack deserved the worst fate imaginable. The thug roared with laughter, totally down to crack open all the rum barrels and celebrate. The guy was sure that the young kid would go way further than he ever did. Vlad ran his sword through his opponent's chest. Jack quietly said the kid did good and should chill out a bit before heading off. Before kicking the bucket, Jack confessed he'd lived a pretty messed up life, but he was stoked that in the end, he was crushed by Vlad's shining world. For the first time ever, Vlad tasted revenge, and man, was it sweet. But it wasn't long before he started getting some kind of bitter aftertaste. Vlad reached for the glass of whiskey Jack had poured him before he died. He downed the hard stuff in one go, no chaser needed. The thug's last words echoed in his head, about how Vlad would climb way higher than him. He left a gold coin on the bar. A knight always pays for what he gets. This place was called Rose's Smile, a place where people just kinda stagnated, like still water. But today, a drop of that water spilled out, leaving a little ripple in the young man's world.